In a world where martial arts reign supreme over law, every fighter dreams of becoming the ultimate master. This man, No, was no exception. Relentlessly training day after day, he hammered his fists into solid rock, carving out a deep crater. Soon, his legendary diamond body technique would be complete, and his name would echo throughout the martial world. But that dream was shattered the moment he met her. It seems even the greatest heroes fall for a beautiful woman, and she was a noble lady who gave up everything to be with a simpleton like No. He was overwhelmed with happiness and washed his hands of the martial world, but their peaceful days were fleeting. Soon, they were blessed with triplets. But the birth was too much for his wife, and she tragically passed away, leaving No a widower, a single father to 3 infants. He vowed to become the best dad he could be, but his first problem was money. The few jewels she left behind wouldn't last long, and as if poverty wasn't bad enough, his luck was even worse. He worked himself to the bone, but this greedy old geezer tried to cheat him out of his wages. Seeing that No was a struggling single father, the old man made an offer. He suggested No join the prestigious Dragon Association, a guild that recruits talented swordsmen. Do a good job, and he might even get a little bonus spending money. In the land of Muram, the Dragon Association and the Sword Clan were 2 legendary factions, and with 2 other clans just emerging from a devastating war only. 3 years ago, No knew he had to be cautious. After racking his brain, he decided to try his luck with the Sword Clan first. To sign up, he was given a string to tie around his wrist and sent inside for a test to prove his worth. After being shoved forward, he quickly entered before the people in line behind him got angry. An instructor led him to a group of men struggling to lift massive stones. This was a test of pure, raw strength. Thanks to his old rock-smashing days, he lifted it with ease, but his old age caught up to him, and a sudden back pain made him grimace. The onlookers stared in disbelief. Was this guy a martial arts master or a senior citizen? Having passed the first trial, No was led to the next challenge. He saw a sand pit for a jumping test. One guy was screaming to hype himself up, but in the end, was too terrified to jump. No soon understood why when he saw the glint of shattered pottery lining the entire pit. One wrong step would mean shredded feet. Seeing No hesitate, the proctor taunted him. Go home and cry to your mommy if you're scared. But the simple-minded man just waved his hands frantically, rendering the proctor speechless. Without needing any run-up, No simply leaped into the air and landed gently on the other side, leaving the crowd questioning their entire reality. He effortlessly cleared the second trial. That was it? Is this test even serious? But the next challenge left No utterly speechless. Who in their right mind tests a warrior by making them chop firewood? And yet, right at that moment, while a pot-bellied man next to him was showing off for no reason, No swung his axe once. A single, clean strike split the log perfectly in 2. He received the string for passing the third trial. No was ready for the next stage, but was hit with some shocking news. The test was over. Wait, that's all? He thought. I was expecting something way more intense. The absurdity of it all left him with a blank expression on his face. When asked about his martial arts title, No just remembered that people in his village used to call him the Special One. The instructor was at a total loss for words. Was that some kind of bestseller title? When asked which academy he graduated from, No's extraordinary mind couldn't remember a thing. Maybe it was a side effect of post-COVID brain fog. The defeated instructor gave up and just led him away. But on the path, a wooden dummy caught his eye. It was a special training device for real warriors. It looked worn out and flimsy, but No was still curious. He wanted to give it a try. Following the instructor's directions, he threw a punch at its core, only to be sent recoiling back, shocking everyone. What in the world? As the old man laughed at him, saying he'd need another 30 years to make a dent, No ignored him. He struck again, fast as lightning. One of the wooden arms was driven deep into the dummy, but for No, that wasn't nearly enough. He had channeled his power into the wrong finger, and so, to redeem himself from this shame, he poured all his strength into his fist and slammed it home. Cracks spider-webbed across the dummy's surface, before it exploded into a million pieces. The instructor's jaw hit the floor. He immediately took No to another area to properly assess his power. But before anything else, No started demanding his payment. Back in his mercenary days, he'd get his reward right after completing a job. But without those 3 things, he wouldn't even start. He immediately requested the company's employee benefits package. He wanted his children to attend school for free and demanded the clan provide a nanny to look after them. Seeing the manager's face freeze like a statue, No realized he might have asked for too much, but he didn't stop there. He professionally began to negotiate his price. He would pay for the nanny himself out of his own salary, but the free education for his kids was non-negotiable. This demand left the manager completely frozen in place, And of course, nobody met his demands, so he was promptly kicked out of the Sword Clan. But that little bit of shame wasn't enough to break his spirit. So, he hustled over to the Dragon Association. Just like before, No effortlessly shattered their wooden posts and passed the test. But before submitting his application, he brought up the special benefits for a father of three. The association wasn't a government welfare agency, but they still tried to accommodate him. Seizing the opportunity, No listed off a series of outrageous conditions, and shockingly, the old man agreed to every single one. He then looked at No with an adoring gaze and a rather suggestive smile. That night, as he watched his children sleep, the one with the most hair reached out and grabbed his finger. Looking at these tiny bundles, No had no idea how to raise them when all he'd ever known was fighting. So, the next day, the Dragon Association put up a notice for a nanny, but then a three-headed monster showed up to apply and was immediately rejected. The next one was too old and was also sent away. Finally, a powerfully built woman walked in. Before introducing herself, she looked around the room and began criticizing everything. A man with small children, living in such filth, even as No tried to stop her, so they could talk. She swiftly cleaned the entire house, then shot like an arrow into the room where the babies were crying. Seeing her expert skills, No immediately awarded her the title of Best Nanny. As for No himself, he was given a citizen ID card and was officially recognized as their strongest warrior. His first assignment? Gate duty. You'd think such a lowly job would wound his pride, but No was actually thrilled. After all, who wouldn't want a simple job? His new life was simple, a cushy gatekeeper job where he just had to show up to get paid. Meanwhile, the guildmaster, JHDO, was lost in the world of boys' love comics. Then, an announcement came that lodging was already prepared for No, but this special treatment made another member pout, wondering why the boss showed such unusual interest. It was simple. No was a fascinating specimen, a man who could single-handedly shatter martial training posts. Besides, the boss was still bitter that the Sword Clan had rejected a deal he'd made. So, in front of his superior, he laid out everything he'd discovered about this mysterious man. And of course, such exceptional treatment was reserved for No alone. No one else would even get a look in. Recognizing No as a man of immense power, the old master Hak-Do asked him if he'd ever set foot in the world of Murim. But No couldn't exactly reveal his traumatic past, so he played dumb and said he hadn't. Naturally, the old master wasn't buying such an obvious lie. He immediately assigned someone to watch No's every move, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. You won't escape my grasp. But No was busy with a far more sacred duty, the sacred duty of fatherhood, putting his little hellions to sleep. But whether he rocked them or did squats, their eyes remained wide open. 1,000 minutes later, the little monsters finally succumbed to sleep, snoring away. But the moment, No tiptoed and gently laid his son down. His eyes shot wide open. He immediately led the choir in a screaming symphony with his two siblings, an all-night rave that made No marvel at his children's demonic energy. It was truly magical. They must have pressure sensors to be this sensitive. Defeated, he slumped down to rest his back for just a moment. The very same child who was just screaming his lungs out was now smiling sweetly, likely dreaming of some pretty lady. But when it was No's turn to rest, it was never that simple. He had to sleep with both his legs suspended in midair. A few months passed, and No grew accustomed to his simple routine. Stand guard all day, go home, and collect his paycheck. It was an incredibly peaceful life. Suddenly, a man approached him with a mission, claiming No was the only one available. But No had grown attached to the easy life of a salaried worker. He'd grown too comfortable. Who would ever want to return to the life of a mercenary? One moment, he was shaking his head so hard it nearly fell off. The next, upon hearing the pay was 5 silver coins, he snapped to attention and accepted. But when the details were revealed, bodyguard duty for 5 whole days, his enthusiasm vanished. Yet, he flip-flopped faster than a pancake when he learned he'd be paid daily. It seems materialism truly does conquer all. As No cheerfully headed home, he found the nannies overseeing an intense competition. The babies were learning to roll over. It was a grueling match, especially with the heavyweight contender, Little Miss Shin. She was taking the lead, her superior agility, a result of being born first. Inspired by her victory, the little troublemaker, Gang Hin, stubbornly followed suit. But being a warrior who couldn't see where he was going, he ended up in a head-on collision. Knowing his children were still toothless, the great father No decided he would host a celebratory barbecue, mostly so the little ones could drool over the smell. When the day of the mission arrived, he joined the escort party. But because he was traveling on foot, he was immediately mocked by the others for not knowing how to ride a horse. Their jeering, however, quickly annoyed the leaders of the procession. They clearly looked down on mere gatekeepers like No's group, and made their disdain known. But their leader began to lecture them one by one. He warned them not to run their mouths and to never underestimate a soldier of the Dragon Union. Then, he turned to No, encouraging him to learn horseback riding for the future. Refusing to be looked down upon any longer, No simply placed a hand on the saddle and vaulted onto the horse, as light as a feather, landing gracefully before the astonished eyes of everyone. The others were speechless. Then why didn't you just ride from the start? Why all the theatrics? After a long journey, they finally arrived at the Dao Dao Sword School. It was the day of the sect leader's birthday celebration. After a formal greeting, they were finally welcomed inside. But it wasn't long before No started to miss his children. His eyes grew teary. After stuffing himself at the feast, he went for a walk to digest the food. And that's when he stumbled upon something. A group of kids were busy trading insults. Suddenly, one of them recognized No's Dragon Union uniform and immediately dragged his friends over. They all rushed towards him, but their excitement died when another boy spotted the tag on No's hip. It marked him as a mere hired soldier, just a low-ranking grunt, unworthy of their attention. Just as No wondered how to handle these little demons, a young girl with a strong sense of justice stepped forward to help. She was wise beyond her years. No union would waste money hiring outside help without a good reason, she declared. And with that, the kids went back to arguing amongst themselves. Losing the argument, the boys tucked tail and ran. The girl then turned to No, comforting him like a wise old woman for being scorned by children. But No didn't pay it any mind. After all, he was just an ordinary mercenary, but the girl acted as if she knew a deeper secret, speaking with a dangerous glint in her eye, because even the black silkworm fears you. Then, as if nothing happened, she ran off to join the other kids. Her words left, No stunned, but he was snapped out of it when he saw shadowy figures appearing on the walls. The intruders moved swiftly, knocking the children out with a sleeping powder. Their target was clear, the little girl from moments ago. In an instant, a dark shadow leapt to her defense. What looked like a child was actually a black-clad guardian who dispatched the first attacker in a flash. The others met the same fate. In the blink of an eye, the ground was littered with bodies. Standing before the mysterious man in black, the remaining attackers charged, hoping to overwhelm him with sheer numbers. But they were instantly thrown back by a hidden power. Countless hidden blades flew from his robes, striking down the assassins. He then ordered the girl to run. Seeing the other children being abducted, No remained frozen, feigning shock. But the girl was now sprinting for her life, directly towards him, with a whole mob of assassins on her tail. The sight made No's face drain of all color, his jaw hitting the floor. "Lolas are not my type, kiddo," he panicked internally. An overwhelming number of enemies were closing in, while the mysterious guardian was already struggling against the horde. No's conscience finally kicked in. Gritting his teeth, he drew the sword from his back and roared for everyone to halt. The assassins braced themselves, thinking he was about to attack. But the greater the expectation, the greater the disappointment. Instead of fighting, No simply scooped up the little girl and bolted, leaving the assassins standing there in utter confusion, speechless. But only for a moment. They quickly snapped out of it and gave chase. No knew his only option now was to run for his life. He quickly grabbed the girl and ducked her head down. For a terrifying second, she thought he was about to toss her aside, but instead, No used his own body as a human shield. He smashed through a wall of reinforced concrete, but before he could take 3 steps, the pack of hunters had him surrounded. They didn't just have numbers, they were all seasoned killers. With the girl in his arms, No had no choice but to charge in head first, kicking away anyone who got close. Feeling the child tremble in his grasp, he knew he had to end this fast. He rushed the remaining thugs. One of them lunged with a sword, aiming to run him through. For some reason, No simply raised his foot to block the blow. The moment the steel blade touched the sole of his shoe, it instantly shattered into 100 pieces. It was an absolutely unreal sight. The assassin was rewarded with a taste of No's legendary boot. After knocking him out, No even used the man's face as a shock-absorbing cushion for a perfect landing. Witnessing his incredible agility, the entire group began to hesitate, a seed of fear planted in their hearts. Seeing his fierce expression, they knew they were in for a world of pain. But to their surprise, No suddenly turned and bolted, running for his life. Luckily, one of them snapped his comrades out of their daze, and they resumed the chase. Seeing them relentlessly on his tail, No plunged deep into the mountains, using the dense forest to cover his tracks. Meanwhile, the rest of the kidnappers weren't just running wild. They were all converging on his position. The child was their only target. All the sect elders gathered around, studying the terrain and splitting up to search for the kidnapped children. Just as the sect leader himself appeared to request backup from the others, a scout rushed in with an urgent report. The news left everyone stunned, and they immediately hurried outside. What they saw was the image of No, covered in scratches and bruises, yet carrying the little girl on his back, still perfectly clean. Before the astonished crowd, No just smiled, cheerfully announcing that his protection mission was complete. He recalled the events of the past 2 days. He had been hunted until late into the night, but not for a second. Did he consider abandoning the child to save himself? After confirming the number of enemies, he laid an ambush, waiting for the perfect moment. As the group ran past his hiding spot, No launched a surprise attack on the man at the very rear. He then lunged forward, kicking at the next target. The man thought it was a simple kick and raised his arms to block, but at the last second, No switched his technique, turning the kick into a devastating axe stomp from above. It completely shattered the guard the man had created. Convinced he could now be blocked, No gave the man a gentle, affectionate headbutt before moving on. Hearing the commotion of the pursuers right behind him, he leaped onto a nearby tree trunk. Using it as a springboard, he launched himself down, planting one enemy's head firmly into the ground. Then, he stood up and used his iron headbutt, ramming it straight into the silicon-filled chin of the next guy. With a whole pack still swarming him, No showed off his long legs, since his hands were busy holding the child. He couldn't block a knife that came his way, but in return, he gave each of them a swift kick to the afterlife. After taking them all down, No flew up the side of a cliff. He didn't know who the mastermind was yet, so he had to protect his own precious life. The little girl in his arms could feel the wetness of the blood flowing from his wound, but to No, it was nothing more than a mosquito bite. The two quickly found a lake to wash and bandage their injuries. The girl had a hurt wrist, probably from being tossed around during the fight. Suddenly, No's fatherly instincts flared to life. He gently washed her hands, and then, out of habit, her face too. When they got hungry, he caught fish and grilled it for her. Seeing the child sleeping peacefully, No swore he would do whatever it took to get her out of this place safely. On the journey back, everyone stared at him with strange eyes. In the end, No could only lie, saying a noble benefactor had helped him out, and he only chipped in with a few punches. The others couldn't help but feel a surge of jealousy, thinking they should have been the ones to claim that glory. The group leader also took note of No. Though he seemed weaker, he had somehow defeated a whole team of professional kidnappers. Arriving back home, he pulled his own children into a warm embrace. But before he could shower them with affection, they all squirmed away and scattered, leaving the old father's fragile heart completely shattered. Luckily, his precious daughter didn't abandon him. No hugged her tightly, sobbing and swearing that as long as he had her, he didn't need those two little troublemakers. But maybe he should have looked closer. The two boys had expressions of pure disdain written on their faces before they vanished. At the headquarters of the Forgotten Guild, the boss was fuming at his masked subordinates, the masterminds behind the kidnapping. He was furious, not just because 5 of his squads had been annihilated, but because the mission itself was a complete failure. And when he learned that the one responsible was just a lowly guard, his rage boiled over. He stomped the floor into pieces. They had already discovered that No was part of the Dragon Union during their 2-day investigation. In the end, they had sent 3 elite teams to stop the powerful members from the Tao sect, yet not a single one returned. This sent the boss into a blind rage. He grabbed one of his men by the collar, demanding answers, because the Dragon Union had no one strong enough to wipe out 3 of his elite squads. He then ordered all his henchmen to find and investigate the person who helped No. After they left, a worried expression finally appeared on his face. If he reported to his superiors that his troops were defeated by a single grunt, he'd get an ashtray to the head. Back to his daily life, No was as healthy as an ox, completely unaware that the men he fought were all high-level professionals. His best friend, hearing that No received a cash reward, immediately tried to invite him out for some karaoke and drinks. But No, being a model father devoted to his children, firmly refused. However, seeing the disappointment on his brother's face as he sulked back to his spot, No couldn't bear it and promised to buy him a few tigers. After the drinking session, a very tipsy No staggered his way home, only to be blocked by some tall, handsome guys looking for a bit of fun. But he had to decline, as he had 3 noisy kids waiting at home. He even offered them a more suitable Rose, the old lady next door, but it turned out they were only interested in his muscular body and rushed him. No, however, was like a ghost, gracefully gliding right past them. The 2 thugs immediately clutched their stomachs in pain. The remaining men were shocked but charged in. Anyway, No didn't even bother to dodge, taking their full combo of kicks and punches. But when his face started to get messed up, he finally got serious, his hands and feet moving in a blur, taking down 3 men at once. After burying them back into the earth, No casually walked home, singing a cheerful tune along the way. Were they blocking his path for his money, or for something more? It hardly mattered. The liquor in his system had washed away all his cares. The 3 thugs returned to their boss, forgotten, with nothing but bloodied heads to show for their efforts. The sight left him in awe. This was clearly no ordinary warrior. Suddenly, a messenger's voice echoed, though no one was in sight. They waited until their patience wore thin, only for the silence to be shattered by a piercing scream. It was the cloaked man, the same one who had rescued the little girl before, and this time he'd brought 500 soldiers to storm their very stronghold. Seeing the overwhelming force, the mysterious figure ordered an immediate attack. His minions swarmed from all directions, and in a flash, the entire forgotten sect was engulfed in a sea of fire. Time passed in the blink of an eye. The children had shot up like weeds, their hair now full and thick. Even though they were barely a year old, their doting, clumsy father was already feeding them pieces of chicken. "If you're willing to give, I'm willing to receive." The little one chomped down on the meat, not caring if he could handle it or not. Then came the moment of truth, the favorite parent contest. After some careful deliberation, the crawling babies completely ignored their father. No, he had expected a loving embrace, and even opened his arms wide for a hug. But they zipped right past him like he was invisible, heading straight for his old friend, who roared with triumphant laughter. But alas, the cruel river of fate, the target of the children's affection, was actually the sword resting by the table. No immediately stepped in to stop them. He refused to let their innocent hands be stained with blood. Instead, he forced them to study, and study, and study, until they practically coughed it up. At this point, the number of guards at the gate had increased to 4, but 2 of them did nothing but complain about their cushy, high-paying job. They wished a war would break out, just so they could get a promotion and do something more exciting. Seeing them dream of joining the army left No utterly baffled. To him, this job was paradise, a match made in heaven. Under the scorching sun, his best buddy craved a bowl of cold noodles. But all No wanted was meat. When you're as poor as he is, a full stomach is the only priority. When his friend insisted on a change of diet, No casually showed off a giant rat he had caught. The man was practically drooling but still pretended to be disgusted. He scoffed that it could never compare to cultivating ki. No could only sigh. A man with no muscle just sees the world differently. His dismissive attitude finally set his friend off. The man exploded, determined to teach him a lesson. A beautiful exchange of pleasantries followed. Beep, beep, beep. Luckily, they were stopped before things got out of hand. And since No was a simpleton, he forgot the whole incident 3 seconds later. Spotting an old janitor sweeping by, the 2 quickly put on a friendly face and greeted him. This was a far cry from the other 2 sourpusses. The old man reminded No of his terrifying demon master, so naturally, he sidled up to strike a conversation. The moment the elder began with, "Back in my day," everyone groaned, expecting a boring story. But this tale was different. This was about his legendary battle with the leader of the demonic cult, an opponent with power on the level of a Super Saiyan. Though he had told this story countless times, to think such a legendary figure would end up as a stooped-over janitor, it was no wonder the other guards looked down on him. But for the old master, this was just a humble pastime. Come lunchtime, No devoured his food like a man possessed. He was inhaling food like a blender when the captain called him for a mission. As usual, No refused, but after hearing there was a bonus, his eyes lit up like high beams, and he instantly agreed. The captain was left speechless. I'm still not used to how fast he changes his mind. Time continued to fly, and soon the children were as tall as giants. But the heartwarming scene lasted only a moment before they spotted a chicken and swarmed it like a hungry mob. This time, No's mission would take him far away. He wanted to bring a gift back for the nanny, but she was more practical. Dealing with these little monsters is tough. Just give me the cash. The entire mission had been arranged by the elder, 𝒂𝒓𝒕𝒊𝒂𝒍. However, his subordinate was still anxious, unable to believe they were relying on a mere gatekeeper. And so, they arranged for a full support army. Squad 3 was stationed within a 100-mile radius, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. The conversation then shifted to the investigation into No's past. The result? They couldn't find a single trace of him. Yet, 𝒂𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒍 seemed completely unconcerned. He declared the investigation unnecessary, certain that No was an exceptional individual who didn't need to be watched. He was sure No wasn't lying. But the person he was being sent to meet was an incredibly fierce and intimidating old man. This geezer looked more like a thug from the market square. He clutched a letter menacingly, refusing to hand it over. No had no idea what it said. He was just following orders. He was just trying to make a living. This enraged the old man, who felt utterly disrespected that the Union had sent only a single man. He crushed an orange in his fist in pure anger. Sensing the tension, No put on his usual nonchalant expression, wanting to avoid trouble. But this only fueled the old man's rage even further. He ordered his so-called weak brothers to step forward. "If you can defeat them," he snarled, "you can take what you came for." No shot to his feet, ready for a fight. But before he could even move, two thugs lunged at him. Pathetic. They were far too slow. With a single motion, he deflected their strikes. His arms became a blur, a storm of strikes that sent teeth flying. He laid out one attacker after another. It was a sight that captivated the old man watching from afar. Shaking out of his shock, he quickly sent in his two strongest disciples. While No was busy casually dismantling the grunts, two new challengers rushed in. He didn't even flinch. He effortlessly raised his iron-hard arm to block their strikes, and the impact instantly caused their hands to swell like balloons. Seeing them scream in agony, he gave each of them a single punch just to shut them up. The old leader's jaw dropped to the floor once more, and then he started bawling. The victor becomes king, while the loser can only weep. After receiving the box, No couldn't help but feel that something was off. It felt like he had just spent the day bullying a bunch of children. When he returned, he immediately questioned his captain, but the captain simply ignored him, shutting him up with a fat bonus. His subsequent missions proved to be just as bizarre. He grew exhausted from the late nights and early mornings, and on his way home, he kept running into strange, masked individuals. They all wanted the item he had retrieved. Seeing No reach into his robes, the entire group went on high alert, only to be gifted the prize he had just won. He simply tossed it to them and walked away. But the main character's departure left the masked assassins completely baffled. Upon their return, their captain grilled them for the mission's utter failure. No, however, was filled with resentment. Lately, he was always stuck on solo missions, constantly running into people trying to end his life. The seeds of suspicion against his captain had been planted. The captain brushed the incident aside and dismissed him. No's only goal was to live a simple life as a gatekeeper by day and return to his children at night. But this act didn't fool Elder 𝒂𝒓𝒐𝒏𝒈𝒆💔. The old man knew No had intentionally let the secret message be stolen. He understood exactly why No didn't want the high-paying jobs, because a father can't just vanish into the night every evening. But that was no longer important. They had now witnessed his true power, so those little tests were no longer necessary. Back home, No was trying to get in shape, and right as he was doing a split, his little boy caught him. Wanting to be just like his dad, he tried to copy him, and the other two kids immediately joined in, wriggling like little worms. But that was a hard no from their father. No only wanted his precious children to grow up to be successful, respectable people. Just then, the nanny returned from the market. She wore a worried expression. Lately, any child who stepped out of their home simply vanished. Kidnappers were running rampant everywhere. But the Heavenly Dragon Guild couldn't do anything, as many other factions were keeping a close eye on them. Naturally, as a father, No was deeply concerned. To operate so freely in Heavenly Dragon territory, these kidnappers had to be incredibly powerful. He gently stroked his children's heads, while they remained blissfully unaware. That night, while on a mission, No pushed his speed to the limit, trying to return to the city before the gates closed. Seeing the moon being swallowed by dark clouds, he hoped to avoid the rain. But fate had other plans, and a torrential downpour answered his prayer. Soaked to the bone, he was rushing home when suddenly he sensed something. He froze and found himself compelled to turn back. What greeted his eyes was a vision from hell, a village drowned in blood, with bodies littering the ground. From a small hut, an old man desperately tried to flee, but he couldn't escape the blade that swung from behind. These monsters were slaughtering the entire village, not even sparing the crying children. Seeing the horror before him, No couldn't just stand by and watch. He rushed towards the savage bandits. As they continued their inhuman rampage, they paused, noticing a light inside a house. Suddenly, something shot through the air and extinguished it. It was No, who had skillfully used small stones to put out the lanterns. The look on his face said it all. He couldn't wait another second to wipe this filth from the earth. As the surroundings plunged into pitch-black darkness, the bandits panicked and ordered someone to light a lamp. One of them slowly walked inside, pulling out a 𝒂𝒓𝒐𝒏𝒈𝒆💔 flare. But the moment it ignited, a stone smashed into his head. Blood immediately erupted like a crimson fountain. He collapsed, dead before he even hit the ground. Aided by a brilliant flash of lightning from the heavens, No revealed himself. He was already behind another man, instantly snapping his neck backwards. He was now the hunter of these beasts. The bandits were thrown into chaos, completely blind in the suffocating darkness. Then, the next bolt of lightning struck, and so did No. He shattered one man's jaw, then mercilessly stomped on the leg of the man beside him. With a single punch to the chest, he turned another's entire ribcage to dust. In the flickering light, one of them managed to land a blow, sinking a dagger into No's shoulder. The man grinned, thinking he had won. But No's eyes only flashed with cold fury. The heavens went dark again, and when the next bolt of lightning came, the man was nothing more than a broken heap on the ground. The few remaining men, their eyes finally adjusting to the dark, began to surround No. He glanced from side to side, then launched himself at the wretched bastards. He fought with such ferocity that he forgot the blade still stuck in his shoulder. When the dust settled, bodies lay strewn across the mud. Only No was left standing. He saw one survivor still moaning, and, with cold indifference, stomped his head until it sank into the rain-softened earth. After helping the survivors, No lifted a massive crate. Huddled beneath were the women and children who had been hiding from the bandits. No clutched his face, letting out a frustrated groan. He screamed like a madman, knocking over a chair behind him. He was furious that this responsibility had been thrust upon him. The next morning, he found the villagers from last night seeking refuge in his kitchen. He was just about to tell them to leave when he heard something. Laughter. His children were in the yard, playing happily with the kids from the village. No's heart softened as he watched them. Looking at these helpless women and children, he knew he couldn't do anything but help them. At least until they could support themselves again. They thanked him profusely, but No just brushed it off. As a father himself, he couldn't send children the same age as his own back to that blood-soaked village. No went to his captain to request supplies for the women, but he was rejected. Although they needed to catch the mountain bandits, caring for the victims was the imperial court's job, not the guild's. Due to their strict laws, they couldn't provide welfare for those people. Still, No couldn't bear to heartlessly throw them out, knowing they had nowhere to go. The captain then offered a suggestion. If No got promoted, he would have the authority to help them. But he was only interested in his gatekeeper job. Then, an idea sparked in his mind. He could just throw a pile of money at them to solve the problem. But he immediately shook his head. That was money he had worked tirelessly to save for his own children. As if fate was listening, he spotted Elder 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕. He called out, thinking the old man could surely help, seeing No's casual approach to the guild master. The nearby guards bristled with anger, but were quickly waved away. Once they were alone, No couldn't hold back any longer and poured out his grievances. He couldn't possibly support 10 children and 4 women all by himself. As he recounted the story of the village massacre, Elder 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕 reached a grim conclusion. That was undoubtedly the work of the blood cult. The old man accepted the task, vowing to investigate this matter personally. What's truly terrifying isn't just that, but the demonic cult's 5 strongest warriors under heaven. They've surpassed the limits of mortals. They can cleave entire mountain ranges in 2, or even part the very seas. Countless martial arts masters serve beneath them. So if the demonic cult makes its move, the world will be plunged into a sea of crimson blood. Old Man Hawk quickly sent his men to care for the village's survivors, arranging for the children to enroll in martial schools. As for No, he was given a hefty sum of money, a reward to instill a sense of responsibility. But at that moment, he was eating like a man starved for a lifetime. The nanny, who was used to caring for toddlers, now found herself hauling buckets of water for No's bath. After he devoured an entire table of food, his massive frame was somehow still hungry. Something was slowly brewing within his arms, miraculously transforming into pure muscle. After filling the large tub, No immediately jumped in to soak his weary body, but the pain still lingered. He took a deep breath, and as he exhaled, the water slowly turned a murky black. Even stranger, tiny leech-like particles floated to the surface, horrifying No. But when he rubbed them, he realized it was just dead skin from going unwashed for so long. After soaking until the water was blacker than a starless night, he finally stepped out, showing off his chiseled physique as he moved to the next tub. But before he could even take 3 breaths, he spotted 3 sets of eyes peeking from outside. The children swarmed him like a tiny army, wanting to join in. So, he let them pile into the other tub. After they were all clean, the nanny brought them, each a cup of warm honey milk, which they downed in one go. Meanwhile, deep in the mountains, a cave glowed with an eerie light. Inside, flickering coal lamps revealed piles of skulls scattered about. Worse, a massive pool of blood was spreading out, leading somewhere mysterious. It flowed from a large red circle, connected to 8 other points on a sacrificial altar. A figure stood there, lost in a trance-like dance, while others surrounded them, their faces hidden by red cloths. The high priest of the cult was also present, watching the dance intently before bowing his head like the others. 1 second, the woman was dancing with graceful elegance. The next, a thin red line appeared on her neck. Before you could even blink, her head was severed completely from her body, blood spraying like a fountain. The high priest caught the head and raised it high as the blood on the altar floor. began to flow through channels in the altar, connecting to the stacks of skulls. The moment the priest shouted, the flickering flames suddenly erupted into a massive inferno. But as the ritual continued, intruders burst in from outside, delivering a report that made the head fall from the priest's hand in sheer shock. He couldn't believe his minions had been slaughtered, with not a single one returning. Those men also investigated and found that the one behind it all was a single man. The high priest refused to believe it. This was an impossible feat for one person. But the next piece of news shocked him even more. They had found a first-class soldier's tag, dropped at the scene. Seeing the high priest's blinding rage, the messenger immediately prostrated himself, begging for his life. The priest ordered them to investigate further and bring him the head of that soldier to be used in the ritual. Day after day, No trained diligently. After a run that nearly broke him, he stopped before a cliff face, took off his shirt, and checked his progress. His muscles were finally looking decent. He then began slamming his entire body into the rock wall. By the 800th impact, his shoulder was red and screaming in pain. With his body already feeling its age, the pain hit him sooner than expected. He remembered how his master used to relentlessly beat him until he was limp as a noodle. No matter how much he screamed in agony, his master would just command him to endure it, all to forge his body into tempered steel. Seeing his frail student trembling on the ground, the old master would depart from, spoke calmly to No. You chose this path, so you must walk it. Even though the pain was immense, when asked if he wanted to stop, tears welled up in No's eyes, but he shook his head with fierce determination. He wanted to become strong, just like his master. Finishing his flashback, he couldn't help but sigh, thinking he must have been delirious to give such a foolish answer. Now, he was paying the price. He continued his training, imagining his demonic master's face on the cracking rock as he slammed his shoulder into it again. On a secluded, towering mountain, a single, lonely tree stood. But strangely, instead of a trunk, it had the face of a man. When he spoke, his voice startled a pair of nesting birds, sending them flying away in terror. With a single stretch, the roots covering his body shot out in all directions. Then, with a leisurely pace, he began to descend, step by step, down the mountain, heading towards a grand estate. Upon entering, he was greeted by two long lines of people. The moment they saw him, that crowd erupted into a thunderous chant, "Heavenly Demon." Amidst their worship, he calmly walked to the throne at the center of the hall. Before he could even sit, someone swiftly approached and draped a red cloak over him. This was the leader of the demonic cult, though he called himself the leader of the enlightened church, Chun Myung-hoon. As the guards of the Heavenly Dragon Society were gossiping, shadowy figures with skull masks lurked nearby. Suddenly, they lunged forward, giving each guard a one-way ticket to the afterlife. After dealing with them, they dragged the bodies away, the vile creatures, then swarmed inside, slaughtering the refugees from the village. One of the attackers noticed the water tub, but decided to ignore it, choosing instead to carry the children away. At that moment, as chaos reigned, a single child was hiding in that very tub, desperately stifling his sobs. Meanwhile, No was devouring a meal without leaving a single grain of rice behind. Even his 3 kids had inherited their father's monstrous appetite. After eating his fill, No stood watching over his peacefully sleeping children. But hearing a call from outside, he rushed to open the door to see the very same child from before, covered in wounds and crying his eyes out. He pointed back toward the houses, and No instantly understood they were in trouble. No yelled for the nanny, who immediately popped her head out from the house next door. After entrusting the kids to her, he sprinted off. At the house where the refugees were staying, Heavenly Dragon Society soldiers were already there, covering the dead with sheets. No burst inside, looking. Seeing the women had vanished, he demanded to know where the children were. His fierce demeanor, coming from a complete stranger, instantly angered the guards. They were about to erupt, but luckily, their captain was present. He quickly explained the situation. This man, No, was the one who had saved the others who perished here. The captain then wasted no time delivering the grim news. The enemy had already struck, and 2 of their own had been eliminated. A fire burned in No to chase after the children immediately. But the rules of this place forced him to suppress his rage and stand down. Back at the Alliance, Captain Ham reported to his superiors. He admitted to sending men in pursuit, even without official authorization. As he was being questioned, the elder, Black Bull, suddenly appeared, demanding to know who was sent. Of course, only the lowest-ranked soldiers had been dispatched, leaving the rest for defense. Hearing this, the sect leader immediately ordered more warriors to join the chase. He would alert the other sects as well. This was an attack within the city walls. no longer a private matter for their sect alone, but a crisis for the entire alliance. When Black Bull learned No was appointed as the new team's captain, he grew uneasy. Despite knowing of No's strength, he sent Mun Dong along just in case. Meanwhile, at the demonic cult, the cult leader's right-hand man reported the recent events. His master listened in silence, his expression unreadable. Then, he spoke, his voice laced with disappointment, chiding his subordinate for growing weak after so many years of loyal service. Without a hint of hesitation, the cult leader ordered the man to be dragged away. The demonic cult was beginning its grand rebirth, and there was no place for the weak in the cult leader's presence. He himself had cultivated in solitude for 10 long years, so intensely that tree roots had grown into his very flesh, and in all that time, he yearned for a worthy battle. His right-hand man understood perfectly. Today, he would unleash chaos upon the world. He then ordered his counterpart to join the heavenly demon army's forces, just to stir up some fun. But suddenly, the leader's beloved daughter appeared. She knew exactly what her father was planning, the complete conquest of the Central Plains. Hearing that the cult leader intended to go alone, calling followers a nuisance, his subordinate strongly advised against it. It was far too dangerous without a personal guard. This infuriated the cult leader, who unleashed a wave of terrifying killing intent. In this entire pathetic sect, was there anyone strong enough to protect him other than himself? Seeing this, his precious daughter decided she would accompany her father to broaden her horizons. Back at No's small, quiet home, his children were staring intently at their nanny. She knew they were wondering why their father wasn't home yet. He'd never left before without telling them that he'd be gone for so long. The children, missing their dad, burst into tears. 2 whole months had passed, and the search party was still hunting for the kidnapper's hideout. Finally, they found a cave entrance, a focal point for all the clues they'd gathered. No bolted inside in a flash, moving so fast it felt like an eternity before the others could even catch up. As they rushed in, they found him standing completely still. The scene that greeted them was a chilling tableau of death. The bodies of red-robed figures were strewn everywhere, but of the children, there was no sign. Elsewhere, a high priest was leading his men, fleeing with the children from their pursuers. He was tempted to abandon the kids, as they were slowing him down. However, one of them possessed a rare, pure yin body. Suddenly, a man at the back of the group was lifted into the air by a dark, shadowy force, and then he exploded. The child with the special body was snatched away by that same power. Witnessing this horrifying scene, the priest was scared senseless, yet he tried to put on a brave face. He foolishly demanded a fair fight. The cult leader, amused by this display, decided to humor him and revealed himself. At the same time, No's team received an order: retreat immediately. The order came from the higher-ups, despite not having found the children or the enemy. The situation had become critical. The demonic cult was on the move. They needed to return to the sect and secure their defenses. Finding the kidnapped children was vital, but it would have to wait. The safety of their sect was the top priority. No was seething with rage. They were so close, just a little more, and they would have found the children. Of course, he refused to back down. He relentlessly pleaded with the captain, who, annoyed by his persistence, finally snapped, "If you want to go so badly, then go alone." But he never expected that. No was the type whose courage outweighed his caution. He agreed in a heartbeat, confidently declaring he would find proof of their location within just 10 days. Only after he calmed down did he realize what a fool he'd been. He had abandoned his own children at home to meddle in the affairs of others. A wave of shame washed over him. In the vast martial world, there were countless masters far beyond him. To steel his nerves, No had to resort to some self-hypnosis, reminding himself that he was incredibly strong, invincible even. After psyching himself up, he regained his fierce resolve and dashed through a bamboo forest. Ahead, he spotted a flickering light, a fire they had lit. The glow illuminated the face of one of the children. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the trees. "My dear, how long do you intend to play hide-and-seek?" Knowing he'd been discovered long ago, No stopped hiding and stepped out to face him. It was unmistakable. The man before him was the leader of the demonic cult. When asked where the other children were, he casually replied that he'd let them go. The nonchalant answer sent No into a blind rage, veins bulging on his forehead. Brilliant energy surged through his meridians, making them glow. The cult leader recognized it instantly. This was the legendary Yuan Dagong technique, and his interest was piqued. He wondered which school this intriguing man belonged to. Seeing No had no intention of making small talk, the cult leader's own aura flared to life. The pressure radiating from him was immense, a crushing force meant to push No back. But No was no pushover. He prepared to draw his twin swords, a move that was more for show than anything. In reality, his body was completely frozen by the sheer force of that aura. His instincts screamed at him to stay put. But then, he saw the small child lying on the ground. There was no more time for hesitation. With a roar, No charged forward, aiming to end this in a single decisive blow, launching himself into the air. But it was a feint. He twisted, aiming a powerful knee strike at his opponent's head, only to be effortlessly blocked by a single hand. However, the sword in No's other hand was the true attack, plunging downwards. Yet before it could even connect, the cult leader casually swatted him into the sky. But No wasn't finished yet. After flipping 49 times in mid-air, he corrected his posture and dove back down, his two blades aimed like daggers. And yet, incredibly, his opponent caught both blades with just one hand. He caught the blade, crushing it with his bare hands. But No didn't stop there, closing the distance in an instant and slamming his fist into the man's shoulder. But with a simple flick of the wrist, No was sent flying. Just like before, he shot back like Superman, but cosplaying a superhero was useless. The cult leader predicted his every move, grabbing his arm and squeezing. Veins bulged as a wave of agony shot through No's entire arm. No unleashed his 10,000 strikes technique, finally breaking through the man's defense, seeing his fist about to connect with the cult leader's chest. A triumphant smile spread across No's face. But that smile vanished in an instant, as the cult leader seized his arm and slammed him into the ground. No quickly twisted his body and landed safely. Using the momentum, he lunged forward, trying to pull his opponent off balance. But instead of being thrown, the man stood firm, planting his feet and yanking No forward, causing him to crash into his shoulder. The two were locked in a stalemate that seemed to have no end. The cult leader knew exactly who his master was. It was Master MANHWA. In the heat of their bloody exchange, he suddenly tossed No aside and casually asked where his master was these days. But as if No would ever betray his master, he charged back in to deliver a beating, but before he even touched the ground, he was met with 3 thunderous slaps that nearly dislocated his jaw. Then, the cult leader slowly lowered his arm, conjuring a colossal energy palm, the heavenly demon seal. No braced for impact, but the giant handprint was seared into the very earth beneath him. The man followed up with a vicious backhand that nearly sent No's head flying, then kicked him into the air, delivering a merciless beatdown. Seeing No's battered state, the cult leader couldn't help but wonder. Based on his muscle development, No should have already perfected that technique. It made him recall a time when he had massacred countless masters. He realized No's training was incomplete because of him. As No spun around to throw another punch, he was sent flying by a blast of energy. The cult leader felt a strange sense of responsibility, but that didn't stop his hands from delivering a relentless assault until No was beaten beyond recognition. He finished it, with a devastating blow to the solar plexus that nearly sent him to the afterlife. But then, a vision of his 3 helpless children flashed before his eyes, and No's gaze hardened with resolve. Seeing him trembling like a leaf in a storm, yet still struggling into a defensive stance, the cult leader realized something. The man before him had more guts than brains, relying solely on his body's resilience. He was about to teach him another lesson when the small child grabbed his sleeve, stopping them both. It turns out, the cult leader had saved these children from the hands of evil priests in a desolate mountain pass. One by one, they had tried to run, only to fall from a cliff, left scattered and broken. This was all the work of that woman, So. When asked why she did it, she declared, "Don't you dare lump our divine cult in with the likes of the blood cult. You're poor, evil, and a pathetic failure." As she moved with fluid grace, he anticipated her next move, guessing her attack and swinging his sword behind him. He was right, but she humiliated him by simply flicking her finger, stopping his blade cold. Seeing this fool's reckless courage, So decided to grant his death wish. With a single flick of her wrist, she sent him flying. But she wasn't done with him yet. She grabbed him by the collar, demanding to know who was behind this. "I won't talk. I won't say a word. I just took a bath, so I'm not squealing." Back in the present, No was laid out flat, being protected by a mere child. The cult leader agreed to stop the fight, asking about the school No had trained at. Of course, No had no idea. When asked about his master, his grape-sized brain could only remember that his surname was Mo, but that was enough information for the cult leader to confirm it was MANHWA. Seeing how clueless No was about everything in the world made him furious, but he couldn't blame him. Besides not being very bright, No was also a bit dense. So when his master left without a word, he was completely lost. He remembered that time. The two of them were drinking buddies. MANHWA was a free spirit, and even an invitation to join the divine cult was turned down. They had talked about how he had taken on a new disciple, but didn't want the boy to end up like him. The cult leader finally realized. No was the kid they had talked about all those years ago. Seeing the muscular build of the man before him, so similar to his master's, No figured he must be a mercenary too. The two sat down by the fire and talked through the night. No spoke of his difficult life, a single father struggling to raise his kids, forcing him to join the Heavenly Dragon Society just to make ends meet. Then he wondered aloud just how strong the cult leader was compared to others in the martial world. But just looking at his wild appearance and their recent fight, No knew. He was incredibly powerful. The cult leader himself admitted he didn't know his own level or what to compare it to. But he was sure of one thing. The masters he'd met in the martial world were all leagues stronger than a low-level guy like No. Hearing how weak he was, that he couldn't even hold his own, made No's face fall. That's when the cult leader carelessly let it slip that his master had strictly forbidden him from ever entering the martial world. The shock left No completely frozen, his face crumpling as tears welled in his eyes. Meanwhile, at the Heavenly Dragon Society, they were armed and ready for battle at a moment's notice. The sect leader had just given the order not to lose their fighting spirit, when a message suddenly arrived, ordering them to halt their advance. At the same time, the heir to the divine cult, So, was leading the Heavenly Demon Legion to the location her father had commanded. But even she had no idea what kind of scheme the old man was plotting. She could only follow orders. Right now, her father and No were casually enjoying a stroll, under the setting sun. The children had been sent ahead to the Imperial City, since they couldn't possibly walk the whole way. But after a while, No started to get nervous, fearing he was being tricked and wanted to return to his children. Just then, Soso's group arrived right on schedule. As soon as they met, the cult leader used his telepathy to command his followers not to reveal his identity. He then turned to No and explained, "These are just some mercenaries, and my personal staff." Seeing the towering, muscular warriors before him, No, as naive as a 16-year-old girl, was easily fooled. He couldn't help but be impressed. He figured whatever mission this man was on, the reward must be a massive bag of gold. The cult leader then called his niece over, hearing him use her common name. She immediately understood and played along with the act, smiling brightly. When introduced to No as Muay's student, their eyes met, but not a single word was spoken. They listened as the cult leader spun his tale, claiming they were just rookies in the martial world, and the powerful warriors behind them were merely his niece's attendants. He ordered No to pick an opponent from the group for a test of strength, or perhaps a match with So, but our hero flatly refused, unable to bring himself to strike a woman, not even with a flower stem. Her face darkened instantly, twisting his courtesy into an insult. But how could a simple man like No ever sense such hidden intentions? Instead, he peeked at the hulking figures behind her, causing them to stir, ready to charge. But a single glare from So silenced them all. Her eyes, sharp enough to devour a man whole, flared with a furious killing intent. For the first time, No felt a chill of danger, and instinctively took a step back. She twisted his gentlemanly conduct into contempt for her gender. With a flick of her finger, she beckoned him forward, ready to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. A lesson required before he could even dream of entering the martial world. Seeing her dismiss him as if he weighed nothing, No's temper flared, and all thoughts of chivalry vanished as he charged forward. The moment they stood face to face, he was certain. This petite woman before him was no match, even if she was a warrior of the martial realm. The bout began, both fighters forgoing weapons for a true hand-to-hand clash. No took his stance, his fists raised and ready. A smirk played on her lips. She calmly held out her hand. But just as they were about to clash, a voice echoed in So's mind. The sect leader was speaking to her telepathically. He revealed that the flow of yang energy within No was obstructed. The entire purpose of this meeting was for her to help him open it. Being a true gentleman, No invited her to make the first move, and she gladly obliged. In the blink of an eye, she vanished, reappearing right in front of him. A sudden dread washed over No, fearing he'd be defeated in a single blow. But the attack never came. Instead, her hand gently brushed against his elbow. Then, in a flash, she was upside down, balanced on one hand. He tried to push her away with his free arm, but she had already locked that one down too. She landed gracefully, face to face with him. Her knee shot up, aiming for his family jewels. Thankfully, he blocked it just in time, but even with all his strength, he couldn't budge this slip of a girl. Before he could even catch his breath, So unleashed a flurry of strikes into his chest. Luckily, his other hand was free to absorb, otherwise, his lungs would have been shattered. Facing a delicate girl with the raw power of a grizzly bear, No refused to yield and aimed a punch straight for her face. But at the very last second, he changed his mind, grabbing her wrist instead. He then used every ounce of his strength to try and slam her to the ground. For a moment, she was utterly stunned, never imagining she would be thrown. But just as her beautiful face was about to kiss the dirt, No realized something was wrong. There was no sound of impact. Incredibly, So had stopped her entire body, plus No's weight, with just a single finger. Then, without a hint of mercy, she flung him 7,000 rotations through the air before he crashed to the ground. Seeing his opponent winding up her arm for the next attack, No also began to prepare. He quickly flexed his hands, forming a fist. As her thundering barrage technique erupted towards him in a storm of punches, So saw her opening. She exploited a gap in his defense and slipped inside his guard. Knowing he was trapped, No could only cover his face and duck, bracing for the inevitable. But the relentless barrage of fists was too much. His arms finally gave way, allowing her to strike his chest directly, her blows landing precisely on the acupoints that would finally release his blocked yang energy. After being thoroughly used as a training dummy, No was tossed into a corner of the forest, where he lay unconscious. But this sleeping warrior needed no prince's kiss. He woke up on his own, spitting a centipede from his mouth before leaping to his feet. He saw words carved into the earth, "Do not enter the martial world." But being illiterate, the message was completely lost on him. Just then, he spotted a group on horseback. It was the Heavenly Dragon Society. Seeing No standing there, Captain Ham leaped from his horse. But instead of an attack, the burly captain pulled No into a tight, emotional hug, leaving everyone else speechless. This wasn't some romance drama. Everyone had been worried sick about him. They'd found him thanks to a message No had apparently sent himself, though he had absolutely no memory of it. They also found the children's location. Based on his instructions, No immediately knew this was all part of that old geezer's grand plan. When a companion asked about the strange writing on the ground, the meaning finally clicked. He could only laugh bitterly. He knew his own limits. If he couldn't even defeat a single woman, what right did he have to dream of the martial world? His companion also realized No wasn't the one who wrote the message. The order was given to withdraw and return to the Alliance. High above, the sect leader observed everything from the clouds. He wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing, but he had to follow the final wish of his master. Just as No's kids spotted their father, they ran to him, crying their eyes out. At the same time, the blonde representative of the sword sect met with the leader of the martial arts alliance. The old man, the scar-faced representative of the Four Fates Union, and the elder 𝒂𝒓𝒕𝒊𝒂𝒍 were all gathered to discuss the reappearance of the demonic cult. The Heavenly Dragon Society proposed a 5-year non-aggression pact to deal with the immediate threat, but the others all had the same thought. They refused any deal that would put them at a disadvantage. They would follow 𝒂𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒍's lead for now. Meanwhile, No found a cliff and began to train, fueled by the humiliating memory of his defeat. Driven by pure frustration, he charged headfirst into the rock wall, just like in his old training days. But this time, the pain was bone-shattering. It sent him tumbling to the ground in agony. When the pain finally subsided, No cautiously reached a trembling finger to his bicep. He discovered to his horror that his once rock-hard muscle was gone. He frantically checked his other muscles, but they were all completely soft and deflated. His entire body had been nerfed. Tears welled up in his eyes, realizing that fighting someone from the martial world had somehow weakened him. Back in his daily life, No found himself shivering in the 40-degree heat. He knew this wasn't a common cold. There was only one explanation. His body had grown frail. A wave of anxiety washed over him. Without his strength, how was he supposed to provide for his family? Elsewhere, the sect leader and So spoke privately. He asked her how it felt to fight someone as powerful as No, but her answer was chilling. She said the fight was completely meaningless. Hearing this, the sect leader began to question his own path, wondering why he'd chosen this road when he had the potential to reach a summit no one else could touch. Approaching him, she saw her grandfather muttering to himself, a sign of his advanced age. So knew something was amiss, but he simply turned to face his grandchild with a gentle look. A soft smile bloomed on his lips. In that instant, So understood. The cult leader was preparing to depart. Not by choice, but because fate had determined his time. It was only a matter of how long he had left, and once the demonic cult rose again to reclaim its power, So would ascend to the position of cult leader. Meanwhile, No was trying to get his chi flowing with some morning exercises. Just as he was getting into it, his precious daughter suddenly stirred from her sleep. Seeing the little girl clinging to his leg, refusing to let go, No could only sigh and let her drag him along. It seemed little Seo wanted to go to the market with her daddy. She was immediately captivated by a stall filled with women's jewelry. After all, she was a girl with a taste for the finer things. Indulging her, No asked about a children's bracelet. When he heard it cost 10 coins, the little girl decided it was far too expensive and put it back. Her eyes then landed on a necklace with a rather large pendant. But before he could even ask the price, another person snatched it up. The woman smirked, holding her prize and taunting little Seo. But one look at the killing intent radiating from No's face, and her expression froze. She quickly placed the necklace back where she found it, and scrambled away in a panic. Though he didn't quite get what happened, No ended up buying the item his daughter truly wanted. He was at a loss for words. "Good job, my daughter. 10 coins is too expensive. But you have no problem with a necklace that costs 2 silver Rio." Back home, Seo strutted in like a queen, chin held high, showing off her brand new treasure. However, Myung and Hun couldn't care less. They were far more interested in the food, making So drool with envy. No sighed in relief, thankful he only had one daughter. Any more, and he'd be living on the streets. That night, long after the kids were asleep, he dozed off at his desk. Suddenly, a searing heat ripped through his body, causing him to cry out in agony. He rushed outside, desperate for water to cool his burning frame. Elsewhere, before the giant bronze Buddha statues, the cult leader bowed his head low, then rose with solemn dignity. He turned to say his final farewell to his granddaughter. So accepted her mission, to care for the sect and annihilate the blood cult. She then kneeled down and kowtowed deeply, sending her grandfather off on his final journey. As glowing white motes of light filled the air, she looked up, and the cult leader was gone. He had returned to dust. So quickly composed herself and walked out to the main hall. Everyone was waiting, ready to proclaim her as the new cult leader. But she didn't rush to take the throne. Instead, she commanded her left hand to manage all affairs. In the meantime, So would personally find the blood cult and teach them some manners. Then, to the thunderous cheers of her followers, she levitated into the air and vanished. No's life, in contrast, was incredibly ordinary. Making a mistake meant getting an earful from the captain. But once night fell, they'd all drink together and badmouth the very same man. This was the life of a simple laborer, an old janitor who had seen it all, simply told them to get over it. No matter where you work, life is a grind. Even dead drunk, No somehow managed to find his way home. Never forgetting to bring back dozens of meat skewers for his children, he showered Seo with hugs and kisses, much to her feigned annoyance. But when she realized those two rascals were already fast asleep, she and her dad had the entire bounty to themselves. A huge grin spread across her face. Seo carefully divided the skewers, one for dad, one for her. They feasted together until the next morning, when his 3 children saw him off with the utmost respect. "Please earn lots of money to feed us." Seeing their little faces every day gave No a reason to endure. He had given up on quitting. He was a father with 4 mouths to feed. He had to see them grow up strong. Autumn passed, and the world was blanketed in a pristine layer of snow, and just as he'd promised, he built a colossal snowman. In fact, it was even bigger than their house. Of course, this grand gesture from their troublemaker father had immediate consequences. The entire group came down with a raging fever. The nanny chewed him out so fast he couldn't even keep up. Seeing his precious children suffering from sickness, No, as a father, wished he could bear their pain for them. It seems the heavens answered. He immediately collapsed, unconscious, squeezing onto the tiny bed with his kids. But what truly horrified No was the fact that he'd gotten sick at all. It was proof that this body was growing weaker, that it was no longer the invincible vessel of the past. The thought brought him to tears. The next day, the captain's face was beet red with fury. He couldn't believe it. The money grubber No was actually refusing a mission to investigate the blood cult. He was pushing the job onto others, even though he had been so eager to fight before to save the children. Now, where had that hero gone? No put on a masterful performance of being lazy and sick. His wounds were supposedly severe. He coughed, shivered, and complained of a fever, successfully convincing the captain. The captain believed he was suffering from a grave internal injury. But the moment he turned to write the report, No's true face emerged with a smug grin. The old fool had fallen for it. But when the captain glanced back, No's award-winning acting skills were back on display. He got to leave work early, but he wasn't happy. No work meant no bonus. Raising these rapidly growing children was becoming a serious financial strain. Thankfully, his body was slowly recovering. His muscles still felt numb, but they were coming back to life. The first thing he needed to do was retrain this vessel, and so, after returning home, he waited and waited. But his precious children didn't come out to greet him. When they finally emerged, stepping cautiously outside, he was hit with a wave of shock. His 2 sons were covered in bruises from head to toe. No rushed over in a panic, checking their injuries and demanding to know from the nanny what had happened. This was the work of bullies from the Dragon Martial Arts Hall. A whole group of them had ganged up on the 2 brothers. When No heard the full story, a chilling fury began to boil within him. Those insolent brats. He then encouraged his sons to do the exact same thing. If they dare start trouble again, smash their faces in. But Hun, the more sensible one, knew the consequences. If we do that, he'll just run crying to his parents. Then you'll be the one in trouble, Dad. A similar incident had happened before. The son of a warrior from the Alliance had beaten up another kid, and then used his father's status to pressure the other child's father, who was just a mercenary. This practice of adults interfering in children's fights sent No into a silent rage. But seeing his own precious children's faces, swollen and bruised, he couldn't endure it any longer. He finally agreed to teach them martial arts, a vow he had refused to honor for so long. Countless times, the old nanny saw the father and his children training, assuming No was teaching them to control their power. But perhaps she was hoping for too much. All he truly wanted was to make sure his kids didn't cry during their harsh training. And after making a promise, the children honored their word. Forced into a grueling horse stance, their legs trembled, and they were on the verge of collapse. Yet they bit down hard and refused to shed a tear, even as their eyes welled up. No watched his precious daughter trying to keep up with her brothers, her face a mess of tears and snot. He could only shake his head, wondering where she inherited such incredible stubbornness from. Though everyone knew the answer. The kids were shivering like leaves in a storm, but when asked if they wanted to quit, not a single one would yield. They were determined to complete the training. Still, this was the easiest regimen he knew. No refused to let his children suffer the same agonies he had endured. After endless physical conditioning, he finally decided to let the kids spar with him, but his daughter, Seo, despite his warnings, insisted on learning these dangerous techniques. No never stopped his own training, honing his body back into a weapon of steel. His punches and kicks were sharp and precise, radiating immense power. The moment he let out a sigh of relief after his session, he noticed the children behind him had already mastered the stance. They had grown. So much, so fast, it left him utterly baffled. How are these little grubs growing up so quickly? Later, while standing guard, No couldn't stop stretching his revitalized body, much to his friend's confusion. But that confusion turned to shock when No suddenly burst into tears of joy. The pain that had plagued him for 5 years was finally gone. His muscles had returned, stronger than ever, and he could finally show off his true power once more. Just then, the old sweeper approached them. Even though No wanted to enroll his children in a normal school, they were dead set on learning martial arts in the dojo. But he refused, terrified they would suffer the same cursed fate as him. So, no matter how much he had to yell, he was determined to make his daughter Seo learn to read and write like a normal kid. Of course, the real reason was because the girl was a little tigress. She'd grab her brothers by the hair at a moment's notice. If she joined the dojo, he'd be getting summoned by the master every single day. Seeing the raw talent in No's child, the old man couldn't resist his desire to pass on his arts. He swept his broom across the ground, creating intricate circles in the dirt. Though No didn't understand what it was, he had to admit, the pattern looked pretty cool. Seeing No so insistent on sending his gifted children to a simple village school was something the old man just couldn't comprehend. People would kill for such an opportunity. But No's reasoning was simple. He didn't want his kids to end up like him, forever bound to a blade, dripping with blood. The moment our hero realized the might of the pen was when he saw a shaman earn a mountain of gold just by writing a few characters. So back at home, No continued his mission to shape his golden daughter's future. But she remained resolute, declaring she would only attend the martial arts school, for she was being taught by her father, and there was no shame in that. Hearing those words, No was so moved he nearly cried. His little girl was truly growing up. But even so, when No said one thing, she'd argue back with 10. She was convinced she was a genius who didn't need school, that she could master martial arts and literature all on her own, with a face full of absolute confidence. The next day, No was summoned by the captain to discuss work matters. He watched his superior put on a show with a mountain of paperwork, trying to look busy, but he finished in the blink of an eye while the documents remained untouched. The real reason he called No was to ask if he was satisfied with being a simple gate guard. Of course he was. It was the most peaceful job he could ask for, and he hoped it would last forever. After a long, rambling talk, they finally got to the point. The captain wanted to assign him a new mission. The request was simple: bring a person back here. It sounded easy, but it was a serious undertaking. The destination was Henan, a 3-month journey one way. Including the return trip, he'd be gone for more than half a year. Hearing this, No vehemently protested. He couldn't bear to leave his young children for that long. But the captain had reached his breaking point. He had been incredibly lenient with No, granting him leave for his kids, for injuries, and just because he didn't feel like working. Why don't you just climb on my head and sit there? But for the sake of his children, No refused this so-called blessing. telling him to give the mission to someone else. He didn't care how big the reward was. He wasn't interested. And just like that, the two began to verbally clash. Seeing the murderous aura radiating from the captain, No realized he'd gone too far and quickly shut his mouth. He proposed a compromise. He would accept the mission if he could bring his children along, because he was a father completely obsessed with his kids. The captain was so enraged he nearly fired him on the spot, but a moment later he regained his composure and laid a brilliant trap. If No accepted this mission, his precious children would be given entry into the Dragon Academy. It was a master-level move. From a man with 20 years of experience as a father, the Dragon Academy was the #1 choice for aspiring martial artists. The top 5 masters in the world would personally instruct the students. It was the fastest shortcut to a high-ranking position in the Martial Alliance, a place of such legendary status, and yet No had barely even heard of it. The captain launched into a lecture, telling him this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance that almost no one ever gets. But No only wanted his children to grow up and live a stable life, not chase after some pinnacle of society. But that was his own outdated way of thinking. He shouldn't impose it on his children. Doing so would be like clipping their wings before they could even learn to fly. Hearing that actually made a lot of sense. And so, No asked for a little time to think it over. Think about what? Who has the time to wait for you? If he refused this mission, there was Asa. No way he could continue working here. Those words weighed heavily on No, leaving him sitting in front of the gate, looking like he was in deep constipation. He didn't want to stand in the way of his kids' future, but as a father, he couldn't bear the thought of them walking the same dangerous path he had. Lost in his thoughts, the old master appeared to check on him. What's wrong? Lose another bet? It's not that, old man. I'm betting my children's entire lives on this. I should have just let them stay as unhatched eggs. That night, they shared a drink, and No poured out all his worries. The old master's advice was simple. Take the offer. It was a rare opportunity, one that might never come again. Of course, No was just asking for show. Deep down, he was still stubbornly looking for someone to back up his own decision. Agreeing, he intended to leave, but old Ba stopped him, launching into a tale from his past, a story of his own youth, when his father was just a poor farmer. Though he worked harder than anyone, their family was constantly on the verge of starvation. But his father never gave up. He scrambled for every coin just so old Ba could attend school. This meant the rest of the family had to endure hunger, saving every single piece of copper. Because of this, a young, old Ba grew to despise his education. He threw tantrums, crying that he didn't want his family to suffer like this. In his childish rage, he spoke harshly to his father, vowing he would never end up like him. Fortunately, old Ba's life took a turn when he met a master and began to learn martial arts. He became renowned far and wide. It wasn't until he had a wife and children of his own that old Ba realized he deserved to be buried alive for how he'd treated his father. He wanted to kneel and beg for forgiveness, but there was no one left to ask. His father was no longer of this world. That's why choosing a future for one's children is so critical. But No couldn't accept the idea of being separated from his own little ones, even if they grew to resent him for taking away a golden opportunity. He stubbornly tried to justify his choice. He wanted his children raised by his side, not by others. But who can predict the future? He worried his children might one day regret this, tormented by what could have been for the rest of their lives. In the end, No decided to escape the dilemma by returning home to ask the kids themselves. Their answer would tell him if he was right or wrong. The shopkeeper, having overheard the touching story, brought them some free appetizers. But just as tears were welling up in everyone's eyes, old Ba dropped a bombshell. His father had actually lived a life of luxury in his later years, with servants, a grand mansion, and even a new, beautiful young wife. So that whole tragic tale was just a story he'd spiced up for dramatic effect. The revelation left everyone in the tavern speechless. Damn it. Give us back our tears. From that day on, they learned a painful lesson. Never trust the dramatic tales of old men. When he got home, No made 𝒂𝒓𝒐𝒏𝒈𝒆𝒔𝒕 a shocking announcement. He would allow the children to enroll in the martial arts academy, but only if the twins could learn 1,000 characters. As for Seo, because she was exceptionally bright, she would be allowed to study both martial arts and academics. After he made his decision, the nanny approached him with a request. It wasn't about money. She wanted No's help getting her own child into the prestigious Twin Dragon Academy. What? That was an almost impossible task. You couldn't get in just by filling out an application. The fact that No's own children, descendants of the Great Bai, were accepted was already a miracle, thanks to his brother-in-law's connections. For her son, it was like trying to pluck stars from the sky, a dream beyond dreams. But when No mentioned the sky, Dragon Academy, the nanny was left utterly stunned. She couldn't believe a simple guy like No had such powerful connections. After all, that was a top-tier academy. The son of the wealthiest gold merchant had to bribe his way in with 10 golden coffins. For common folk like them, even dreaming of it was a fantasy. Realizing just how incredible this opportunity was, forced No to reconsider everything. That night, as he replayed their words in his mind, everyone agreed this was a chance of a lifetime, and so, No made his final decision. The next morning, the family resumed their training, preparing for their school to help them build a solid foundation. Now, No had to become stronger to protect his own children until they were grown and married. And so, he decided to tell the kids he'd be leaving for half a year on a mission. In the blink of an eye, 𝒂𝒂 calculated that it would be 180 nights without their father. Acting far beyond her years, she challenged him, asking if they truly needed more money if the cost was him being signed away for so long. This was the longest they would ever have been apart. Understanding his burden, she promised that when she grew up, she would buy him a mansion and a car so he could retire. Before he could even react, she threw her arms around his neck, holding back her emotions as she told her two brothers to go inside. Only when they were gone did 𝒂𝒂 finally let her tears fall. More than anyone, she understood that everything her father did was for them. To comfort his precious daughter, No made a promise. He would embark on his own journey to end illiteracy. In that half year, when he returned, he too would know 1,000 characters. But no sooner had the words left his mouth than his face turned pale. This mission didn't just involve him. He was joining the entire 3rd Battalion of the Sky Dragon Brigade. Heeding 𝒂𝒂's earlier advice, No cleverly asked the brigade leader to write him a letter, guaranteeing his reward upon completing the mission. With that security in hand, No could finally set off. At that moment, the Black Lord's right-hand man was reporting that the Dragon Association was taking an interest in their affairs, but the Lord seemed unconcerned. If that brute showed up, it would be the perfect chance for the Black Lord to execute a plan to pull him to their side, even if it meant sharing a small piece of the profit. But the more immediate concern was that their plan would likely lead to a massive clash. That was the very reason the old man had granted No command over the soldiers. Upon hearing that No's children would be joining their academy, the leaders began scheming, hoping to recruit those promising sprouts to their own factions. On the journey, No was joined by the first-class soldiers of the 3rd Battalion, who constantly looked down on second-class soldiers like him. What irked him the most was their blatant laziness. While the first-class soldiers were allowed to rest, lower-ranking soldiers like No had to march relentlessly without a break. His gaze fell upon a skinny kid beside him, sweating profusely. No offered to help carry his pack, but the kid stubbornly refused. Ignoring the refusal, No grabbed the pack anyway, his eyes drawn to the person's slender shoulders, not at all like a boy's. This caused the kid to blush beet red, as if to say, "Stop thirsting over my body." To No, ranks like first class or second class meant nothing. Everyone should be treated with respect. But one of the first-class soldiers sneered, accusing them of trying to show off. No instantly shot back. "You call this showing off? We're giving it our all, while you first-class elites are doing nothing but slacking off." With that, he turned his attention back to the kid and began teaching him the proper way to march as they finally neared their destination. Days. Since their mission area was large, they were split into 3 groups. That night, while everyone else was eating and resting, No took the young soldier with him to stand guard. The battalion leader had absolutely zero real-world experience for a long march like this. Right now, No was on edge. He worried because, in the dead of night, they'd never spot a surprise attack. That's when his seemingly slow mind began to click. No way. That old geezer of a commander couldn't have been that careless. Back home, the kids had just enrolled in the Dragon Academy, but already, internal conflicts were brewing. An argument broke out over whether their father was stronger than the masters at the academy. 𝒂𝒂 knew they needed high social standing to protect their father from being looked down upon later. But the two knuckleheads inherited all of No's simple-mindedness, never thinking that far ahead. All they knew was how to goof around all day. 𝒂𝒂 only wished she'd been born a son, thinking she'd be more useful than her 2 clownish brothers. While they were causing a ruckus, a man suddenly approached them. This was the master who would be teaching these little maggots, Sun Diok Rang. Right now, Master Sun felt like he was about to have a heart attack teaching these kids. They practiced martial arts like it was a morning wellness routine, with no vitality whatsoever. Just then, 𝒂𝒂 brought the other kids over, but didn't forget to comfort her little sister. In the world of Murim, there are countless female masters, and in Seo's eyes, this was the most mature man she had ever met in her life, aside from her goofy father and her two blockhead brothers. The moment it was announced, the three of them were enrolling. Children from noble houses started whispering. They knew the triplets were just the children of a common soldier, making Sun break out in a cold sweat. He was sure these brats inherited that nasty attitude from their parents. Seeing the commotion caused by a simple introduction, the drill instructor immediately chewed them out. He then ordered the three siblings to demonstrate a few moves, so he could gauge their level. The three of them stood confidently in a powerful stance. Then, they threw a punch, making everyone hold their breath in anticipation. After a moment, nothing special happened, causing the other kids to burst out laughing. These were just basic moves that every single one of them had already mastered. After a bit of kicking and punching, the kids stopped, much to everyone's disappointment. "Are you three finished?" After receiving a confirming nod, the drill instructor could only force a smile and encourage everyone. "Let's give them a round of applause." But just then, a red-haired man who happened to be passing by looked over. He began to curse the drill instructor for his ignorance, unable to recognize that these were incredibly talented and promising children. At the same time, behind a wall, two identical men were pretending to sweep, but were actually eavesdropping on everything. Even they could tell that the triplets had been taught exceptionally well. They wanted to take them as their disciples. After a moment of internal debate, one feared it would cause a huge stir, but he also didn't want his martial art to be lost to time. If it was children with talent like this, then his school would surely have a bright future. While the kids had no idea what their father was up to, No was currently running for his life. Hidden weapons flew out from the trees, taking the lives of countless soldiers. Fortunately, No's reflexes were lightning fast, allowing him to block every projectile. But he couldn't help but feel furious. He was certain the battalion leader had noticed the ambush, but stubbornly ignored it, refusing to listen to a mere common soldier like him. As the two of them pushed forward, they were met by a group of men aiming their bows and arrows at them. In this situation, No couldn't guarantee the boy's safety. If he wanted to live, his only choice was to stick close to him. At that moment, No followed their orders and lowered his weapon. He then whispered for the kid to run, but this boy was just as dense, not understanding him at all. He just looked back with a confused expression. No could only scream, "Go! Go! Go!" as he charged forward. He sent the leader flying with a punch that nearly rearranged his face, then swiftly dealt with the rest. Seeing the boy making a run for it, No finished burying the bodies and then ran for his life as well. The men chasing them didn't seem to have any special skills. He could take them all on by himself, but you can't judge a book by its cover. What if a Murim master was hiding among them? He'd be screwed. Finally, the two managed to escape, collapsing by a stream and gasping for air like dogs. No quickly noticed something and grabbed the boy's leg. "Hey, sir, please have some self-respect. I'm saving myself for my future wife." But in reality, No had discovered the boy's sprained ankle and was helping him fix it. After he was done, he collapsed, exhausted. He was certain their group wasn't the only one ambushed. Surviving and regrouping would be nearly impossible, but just staying here wasn't an option either. No's mind raced. He ordered the boy to ditch his weapon. Carrying it around was like screaming, "Hey, I'm a soldier. Come on, baby." He then began gathering dry firewood, planning to disguise them as common folk to fool the assassins. The boy could only obey, tossing his blade into it next to the river. After gathering a pile of wood, the two of them took off their shirts and buried their supplies. You might think No is a simpleton, but he's actually a brilliant movie director. They would pretend to be lumberjack brothers, terrified after witnessing a fight. Seeing the kid still looked too handsome and clean, No started scooping up dirt and rubbing it all over his head until it looked like a crow's nest. Finally, he was satisfied with the result. The boy looked worse than him. Because No had saved him, the boy felt incredibly grateful and wanted to repay the favor. So, No asked him to teach him 1,000 characters, just as he had promised his daughter. After crossing mountains and streams, the boy was moved to tears. They were still alive. Just as he was thanking the heavens that the enemy was gone, No dropped a bombshell. They were still being watched. Luckily, the kid hadn't noticed. If this coward knew about their stalkers, he'd definitely panic and give them away. The boy immediately thanked him, profusely, praising No as a true master. But No knew he was nothing special, because a true master could spot a target from 100 miles away, 30 paces, while No's perception was currently limited, barely enough to spot an ant. They knew they had to arrive at the rendezvous point late, suspecting enemy spies were lying in wait. A small village near the meeting point to rest for the night. Just as he was deep in slumber, he was jolted awake by the sound of heavy panting. Waking with a jolt, the first thing he saw was the sight of No, training diligently. The rolling muscles right before his eyes made the young boy practically drool. He desperately wanted to ask how he trained to get such an incredible body, but No was no fool. He wasn't about to share the secrets he worked so hard, a technique his master had painstakingly passed down to him, but not without a warning for the skinny little boy to train relentlessly with his frail body. Meanwhile, at the Dragon School, the older students wouldn't stop gossiping about the three brothers' humble origins, calling them mere commoners. The one in the red shirt looked like he came from a wealthy family, so he looked down on them with utter contempt, hurling insults at the brothers. Miyu shot him a glare that could kill, and thankfully, Hun stepped in to stop his reckless little brother, but not without taunting the bullies. Father always taught us that the weakest dogs bark the loudest. Just as the two were about to leave for training, the kid in red started another fire by insulting their father, causing Miyu to erupt in fury, ready to charge. But he was completely stunned to see Hun already moving. The boy flew forward, delivering a swift kick to each of them that nearly made them cough up their lungs, then quickly punched the one beside them. The kid in red at the back saw this and tried a sneak kick, but Hun effortlessly grabbed his arm and flung the punk 8 meters away. Seeing their leader, knocked unconscious, his cronies rushed over to check on him, then glared at the two brothers with puffed-out cheeks. Hun remembered a time when he hid behind his father's back, asking what to do when facing a larger group of enemies. Of course, among the 36 stratagems, fleeing was the best option. But No also wanted them to learn how to inflict just enough pain so their opponents would think twice next time. And so, facing these kids, from rich families who only knew how to waste money instead of training seriously, Hun was ready. When the kid with the headband charged, Hun gracefully used one leg to send him crashing headfirst into the ground. Another boy tried to headbutt his stomach, but thanks to the basic stance they had all mocked, Hun's lower body was incredibly solid and immovable. The boy simply tensed his stomach, sending the attacker flying backward, much to the astonishment of the remaining crowd. He couldn't resist taunting them again for being defeated by the very basic martial arts they despised. Oh, the humiliation. The brats still refused to give up, even after being beaten black and blue, and swarmed him all at once. Yet, Hun simply wanted to handle this himself, telling Miyu, who was standing by, not to interfere. Of course, the little guy was more than capable of controlling this entire fight. These kids were all talk and no action. Each of their attacks was twice as slow as Miyu's, and even slower than So's by 3 times. So, the boy could easily dodge every single blow. He grabbed one of the boys by the arm. The kid thought he was about to be thrown and braced his legs, but he was in for a surprise. Hun pulled him forward, sliding him like a puck, then slammed him face first into the ground. The boy was baffled by how pathetically weak they were. He remembered his father telling him that, if necessary, he should just take a punch to de-escalate things, because he could never use his own strength to crush those weaker than him. That would be no different from bullying an infant. Lost in his own world of thoughts, Hun didn't notice a punk landing a punch right in his stomach. The boy had just a moment to celebrate his hit, but when he looked up, Hun showed not even a flicker of pain on his face. Instantly, another kid snuck in a kick that grazed Hun's perfect nose, making it bleed. The culprit seized the opportunity to launch another kick. This was the one known to have the strongest legs in their class. Yet, Hun blocked it with absurd ease, and with a single kick of his own, sent both of them down, leaving the 2 monkeys crying miserably on the floor. The fierce look in the boy's eyes was still blazing, but he snapped back to reality when he saw them all wailing and crying, even though they were the ones who started it. This made Hun furious, and he wanted to teach them another lesson. Fortunately, Miyu was right there to remind him, if you go too far and they die, what are we going to do for compensation? Hearing that, Hun's face turned pale with fear. And so, the 2 brothers ran for it before the teachers could find out. Very quickly, that afternoon, all the parents of those children came to complain to the manager. They were all people with power and status in the Dragon Association, yet they behaved no differently than fishmongers at the market, much to the manager's dismay. But on the outside, he could only force a smile to keep the peace. Just then, an old man asked how the son of a commoner could even study here, and demanded to find the person who wrote their letter of recommendation to deal with them first. Since this matter had nothing to do with the manager, he gladly passed the buck, directing everyone to the Heavenly Dragon Society to air their grievances. Just then, a red-haired drunkard appeared. He was no ordinary character. He was the right fist, Chun-in sang. Everyone who saw this figure had to bow their heads in respect. After hearing the whole story, Chun-in sang just laughed in their faces. Because upon hearing the news, the only thing he cared about was that Hun was a prodigy. Who gave a damn that their children got beaten? After all, in martial arts, being the one to dish out a beating or the one to receive it was a perfectly normal occurrence. At that moment, the two of them arrived at the guild hall. The other guy struggled for a moment to pull out a pouch. When he opened it, oh my goodness, sparkling gold coins glittered inside, startling No, who quickly hid it away, fearing others might see. Who carries this much money on them? He started to suspect his companion's identity. He had to be the son of a noble family. They decided to use this money for now and pay it back later at the association. As soon as they entered, No's companion immediately headed upstairs. He knew full well the second floor was much more expensive than the ground floor. The attendant looked at them with suspicion, worried they wouldn't be able to pay. No understood. In their current state, they looked no different from beggars. But his companion didn't say a word. He simply tossed a piece of silver to the man. The attendant's attitude changed in an instant as he eagerly opened the door. Without missing a beat, the young man ordered a lavish meal and then handed the bag of gold to him, leaving both of them with their jaws on the floor. This kid was definitely a true young master. Meanwhile, the group of parents was still determined to escalate the issue, but Chun-in sang taunted them, pointing out that their own children had started the fight, only to come back with their heads bloodied. And more importantly, what could they possibly do to Hun now? Then, Mr. Mockery spoke up again. Are you adults planning to fight a child on behalf of your precious darlings who are as weak as wet noodles? His words made the group choke with rage. He then confirmed, so when Hun beat them up, he only used his hands, correct? 4. There were no sneak attacks, no dirty tricks. Yet he still took down an entire group. This proved one thing. Those young masters were just too weak. It wasn't that their opponent was too strong. The truth hit so hard it left them all speechless. Still, they desperately tried to justify themselves, arguing that Hun was the son of Min-il, which violated the academy's admission rules. Chun-in immediately shot them down with a lecture. Their academy trained future leaders of the union, so background was irrelevant. All that mattered was talent and skill. After a heated verbal battle, the arrogant group was finally forced to shut their mouths, partly because they had no argument, and partly because they feared Chun-in's temper might earn them a fist to the face. Seeing the situation, a manager stepped in with a suggestion for the sake of fairness. Organize another match. This time, the kids would fight under the watchful eyes of the adults. That way, their true strength could be judged properly. Besides, if word of a 1-versus-4 loss got out, they'd become a laughingstock. With no other choice, the men had to agree. Afterward, Chun-in asked about where Hun and his brothers were staying. Upon hearing they were introduced by someone from the Heavenly Dragon Guild, he started tearing his hair out. He had a terrible relationship with that group. Meanwhile, No was staring wide-eyed, his jaw on the floor. It was the first time in his life he'd ever seen a table overflowing with food. He dug in like there was no tomorrow, but when he saw the little kid still, eating one bite at a time, he couldn't help but complain. At this rate, how would he ever build muscle? To him, a 5 gold coin meal was a once-in-a-lifetime miracle, but to the kid, it was just a normal day. His casual attitude made No break out in a cold sweat. Rich kids really were on another level. No told the kid to stand guard and call out if he saw any union comrades, while he focused on the food. But the kid simply waved his hand, ordering a waiter to prepare a brush and paper. And with lightning speed, the servant brought the items. Unexpectedly, the boy had a talent for art. His brush danced across the paper, creating perfect portraits of the soldiers. Once finished, he ordered the waiter to find the men in the paintings. As the man left, No was sure the guy wouldn't do the job properly, but the kid was confident he would complete the mission. After all, they had just paid 5 gold coins for a single meal. All they had to do was eat and sleep. Whenever they needed something, they could just throw money at it. It was the dream life for so many. And just as he predicted, the waiter stood outside the door, scanning the area like a human surveillance camera. Meanwhile, the two of them spent their time eating and shopping, living a life of leisure. As night began to fall, the waiter finally came rushing back in a panic with urgent news. The battalion leader was severely injured, stumbling through a dark alley. Only now did he realize there was a traitor in his unit, leaking information to the outside. Just as he thought all hope was lost, convinced he would die. Right there, a tall, familiar figure appeared before him. No and his young ward had arrived just in time to give him a second chance at life. The two of them brought the battalion leader back to the inn. No quickly helped stop the bleeding, pouring some kind of powder into the wound. The leader stared at him, as if wanting to eat him alive. He recognized No as the legendary 5-star employee that everyone whispered about. He immediately wanted to use him. According to rumors, a great general once played chess while his wound was being stitched, looking calm and majestic. Turns out, it was just a tiny scratch he got from a foolish game to build his reputation. So, No's group decided to copy that legendary scene, with 1% of the coolness. No would stitch the wound, while his young partner held the battalion leader's leg down so he couldn't move a muscle. Because it was being stitched without anesthetic, the pain was so intense it felt like his soul was leaving his body. At least it saved them money on sedatives. Meanwhile, the two troublemaker brothers were hiding at home when So discovered them. She was about to teach her foolish older brothers a lesson, but when she heard that a bunch of degenerates had insulted their father, she saw red. She wanted to break their bones and make them crawl. But just as Seo's fury was about to explode, it was extinguished by the sight of a suspicious head poking in. It was Chunin. The moment they realized he was one of the teachers, the two boys panicked. They never imagined a teacher could find their home. Only little Seo kept her composure, stepping forward to greet him politely. She didn't forget to call her troublemaking brothers out to face him. After being invited inside, Chunin got straight to the point about the brawl. And so, Lawyer Seo stepped up to defend them, shifting all the blame onto the other group. She was incredibly clever, starting her argument by invoking the teacher's name, claiming those punks disrespected everything they'd been taught. Then, she brought up the school rule against fighting, pointing out that they were the ones who started it. And finally, the real reason. Those scumbags had insulted her father, so they had to be taught a lesson they'd never forget. At first glance, she seemed like a true lioness. You'd think she had a bright future as a debt collector, and yet, in the blink of an eye, Seo's expression shifted to one of pure pity, worried that her brothers would be punished. It was a classic beauty's trap, seasoned with crocodile tears that left everyone stunned and sweating. Back at the inn, the battalion leader, his soul barely returned to his body, ordered No to undertake a confidential mission to protect the other soldiers, which made No furious. He regretted even saving the man. It only got worse knowing Hun would also be facing danger. This must be why this kind of high-risk job paid so ridiculously well. Nothing in this world comes easy. No then ordered the naive little kid to follow his commands if he wanted to live. No rash moves. After all, the boy was his literacy teacher, so No was determined to protect him at all costs. Of course, he was just saying that. He would ditch the kid and run for his life if things got too dangerous. Entering an inn, No looked left and right. After confirming there were no other children around, he breathed a sigh of relief. With no other groups here, they might be able for money to ditch this mission and return safely. Still, the two of them didn't blow their cover, continuing to pretend to be two brothers out for a meal. After the food filled the table, he looked calm and relaxed on the outside, but inwardly, he was praying to all the gods that the target child wouldn't show up. Just when he thought they were in the clear and decided to head back, fate played a cruel trick. The child appeared, just as the waiter arrived to collect the payment. He then ordered another bottle of white wine, just to stay a little longer. Seeing the child, No knew he couldn't linger here. He could only pray they would leave soon. Looking at the bone-thin child before him, No thought of his own well-fed children, growing up strong and healthy. For their sake, he had to keep living. He was determined to leave and provide for the children. But as the kid bent down to pick something up, No's eyes caught a horrifying sight. A body covered in sickening bruises from a brutal beating. Losing all composure, No suddenly approached their table and sat down as if he belonged there. He then uttered some nonsense. Horse meat is better than beef. It was their code phrase to identify each other. After confirming it, he immediately left the tavern. A huge problem had just surfaced. No's location had been exposed. Thinking back to when they first entered the pub, despite it being dinner time, there wasn't a single child in sight. Even their food was served stone cold. And most importantly, the guests didn't even smell of food. Elsewhere, before a crumbling, ancient tower, a streak of light shot through the sky like a rocket. It was So, making her grand entrance. Behind her, the formidable heavenly demon army stood ready. But upon entering, they found the blood sect utterly annihilated, not a single soul left. It seemed another power had already eliminated this filth. Wondering who could have done this, she dispatched her men to investigate. After her followers departed, a familiar face surfaced in her memory. The blood sect's power was at the upper class level, so the only one capable of wiping them out could only be times him **. At that moment, No was leading his two companions, and the child on a desperate escape, but his companion was having a crisis of faith. Just the two of us? How can we possibly face the enemy? No calmly told him to stick to the plan. In reality, he had no real plan whatsoever. His only goal was to run back to the association. But the long trek was causing the bald man to grumble, completely exhausted. But suddenly, No's sixth sense flared to life, screaming a powerful warning. The rendezvous point ahead was a trap. And now, a wave of uncertainty washed over him. He had no way of knowing if this child was truly innocent or a pawn planted by the enemy. As his mind raced with confusion, the child suddenly flashed a mysterious smile right at him, and with that, No suggested they change their route. He proposed traveling by water, but the bald man spoke up, saying he had already prepared a boat. This made No even more suspicious. He lied, claiming he had no authority to change the plan. He insisted it had to be approved by his superiors. Along the way, the bald man kept pressing him, asking when they would meet the reinforcements. In response, No simply laid down to rest, advising the man to conserve his energy. But internally, No was on high alert. Though he couldn't sense any pursuers, he couldn't be sure they weren't being tailed. As he tried to rest, he heard the bald man making a rustling sound, doing something covertly. No knew it then. He had walked right into their trap, and he was furious. After a brief rest, they set off again. But they hadn't gotten far before No clutched his stomach in agony, claiming he was about to explode. He ordered his subordinate to lead the way, promising to catch up after he relieved himself. But once they were out of sight, No quickly doubled back to their previous spot. He found the signal marker the bald man had left behind, using 2 tree branches. His suspicions were confirmed. To ensure the traitor's plan would fail spectacularly, No crushed the marker under his foot. Let's see how they follow us now. After destroying the evidence, he vanished into the forest. The scene shifts to the children, facing Chun-In. After witnessing their ordeal, he affirmed his commitment to take care of everything. Hearing this, the kids obediently bowed their heads in thanks. He saw an exceptional spark in the young girl, Co, believing she would one day become incredibly powerful. He recalled their first meeting and their immense latent talent. He decided it was time for a test, and stood up, wanting to see them display their skills. He framed it as preparation for their next battle. Her 2 older brothers glanced at their sister, whose expression had become dead serious. She took a powerful stance, vowing to do her best. But Co wasn't fighting alone. She called to her brothers, telling them to get ready, because this man was as strong as their father. That comparison made Chun-In's eye twitch. He couldn't believe he was being compared to a mere private first class. Seeing the 3 children ready, he nodded and roared, "Come on, try and take me." But as the children unleashed their first volley of attacks, every single one was effortlessly deflected. Unfazed, the 2 older brothers clasped their hands, creating a launch pad for Co. She shot forward like a rocket. As expected, her attack was also blocked. Co then reached her hand back, allowing Hun and Myung to grab her and propel her forward once more. As she lunged with a kick, her brothers threw their fists, but Chun-In simply vanished, reappearing on the other side, impressed. These kids are well trained. He mused that the legs of noble children would have snapped by now. The 3 siblings pressed their assault, attacking relentlessly. Just like before, he was able to block them. But he didn't anticipate Co's next move. She flipped into the air and attacked the back of his neck. Incredibly, Chun-In used his own head to parry the blow. Then, he brushed the boy's hands aside. Seeing such raw talent before him ignited a fire within him. The look on his face was so intense, it actually frightened the children. What a strange man. Chun-In wanted to continue the test. He ordered the kids to keep attacking until they collapsed from exhaustion, giving him time to evaluate their true power. Only when the children were panting like dogs did Chun-In finally relent. He sat them down, wanting to have a little chat. He asked who had taught them such formidable techniques. It was No, of course. This made Hun furious, thinking his father's martial arts were being mocked. But when they enrolled in school, things didn't add up. What they were taught didn't align with the official system. A first-class warrior was only considered level 1 or 2. They deduced that while No might be a great teacher, he couldn't help them develop their battle rhythm. Seeing an opportunity, Chun-In decided to entice these children into becoming his disciples. He then casually revealed he was the second master of the Dragon Fist Hall, which left the kids completely baffled. With such a powerful background, why would he do this? They asked him directly for his true reason, but his answer was anything but complex. "Because I want to," Chun-In stated simply. To his shock, So immediately shook her head, flat out rejecting him. He never expected this. Hun was also confused. "You're already our teacher at school," he said. "Why do we need another master?" But So, being a dutiful daughter, had a different reason. She needed her father's permission first, before she could accept him. Chunin felt his self-worth plummeting into an abyss. Anyone else would have been ecstatic at such a legendary offer. But despite the sweet talk, So was absolutely convinced that Chunin wasn't skilled enough to be his master. He then acted as if he was the one making a huge sacrifice, since he had only promised to report the incident with his brothers. Left with no other choice, Chunin had to write a formal guarantee. What a cunning little fox. That matter was settled for now, but the kids still had to worry about their next match against the privileged sons of powerful families. But to Hun, that bunch was nothing more than scrawny chickens who couldn't take a second hit. Chunin immediately put him in his place. It was precisely that kind of thinking that led to their opponent's humiliating defeat before. Hearing that, the boy's face turned pale. His own father had taught him never to be careless when facing an opponent, and yet, he had completely forgotten. However, Chunin encouraged Hun, saying that since he won once, he could definitely win again, as long as he trained diligently. With his business done, Chunin prepared to leave, not forgetting to remind them of their agreement. And yet, So stubbornly refused to call him master until his brother's situation was fully resolved. By this point, No's group had worn their boots to dust, but they still hadn't found their comrades. No immediately switched on his acting mode. He announced that they were probably late because they had joined the Sword Clan's military corps. This made the bald man break out in a cold sweat, though he pretended to be perfectly calm. All the while, No wore a triumphant grin, knowing his target had fallen right into his trap. After taking 3 steps, he stopped and put his plan into motion. He simply stood still and called the bald man closer. The moment No pretended to whisper in his ear, the man's face turned beet red, then a deathly purple. His whole body trembled as his eyes bulged, staring at No. Seeing the bald man drop dead on the spot sent his subordinate into a panic, but the child on his back simply flashed a victorious smirk. That man was obviously not their ally. Only this child was the real deal. He didn't hold back, speaking with an incredibly sharp tongue. It seemed the association had sent someone competent. He confidently stated that if No let him die here, No himself would be the one in deep trouble. But no matter how he looked at it, No felt like he had seen this child somewhere before. It had been a long, long time since No had taken a life. He could feel that this mission was bizarrely unusual. Those two would agree to any ridiculous demand he made. But of course, No wouldn't complain. In this world, nothing is ever truly free. All he could do was push forward for his children. After disposing of the body, the 3 of them began their escape. And just as he predicted, early the next morning, their pursuers discovered the bald man's hastily buried corpse. Meanwhile, back at home, the 2 brothers were training together. Though they bickered relentlessly, Hun cared deeply for his younger brother. Seeing Miyu get hurt, he immediately asked the nanny to prepare a basin of cold water for him to soak in, constantly asking if it hurt. He wondered if it hurt them, but the nanny was just worried the neighbors would report them for child abuse. Like father, like son, she thought. They were just like their idiot father. Meanwhile, No was having a blast smashing rocks, which completely baffled the other guy. His subordinate, however, was still locked in a sword fight. Seeing him struggle, No decided to lend a hand by hurling a rock straight down the enemy's throat, all while carrying the purple-haired dude on his back. He started questioning his own sanity. What was he even doing? Playing the role of some legendary war mother? Facing a maniac like No, who had no shame and seemed to enjoy grabbing people's rears. The thugs feared he was rabid and would bite them. They turned tail and ran for their lives, leaving No utterly confused. Why start a fight just to run away? Shaking his head, No gently asked the guy on his back if he was okay, only to get a snarky reply. But not 3 seconds later, the guy started choking on his own blood. No panicked, but the dude's arrogant glare screamed, "I'm perfectly fine." The attitude made No want to bury him on the spot. It was like the game had just reset. They hadn't gotten far before the same goons were hot on their tail again. No knew they wouldn't give up so easily. He set Purple Hair down and launched himself into the mob. Fists flew, kicks landed, and family jewels were shattered. Snatching a sword, No began carving them up like fish fillets. Again, he had to question reality. There wasn't a single Murim warrior among them. That's why they were all so pathetically weak. But then, a dangerous thought came to him. The idea flashed through his mind. Are the... Maybe it wasn't them. Maybe he'd just gotten stronger. In an instant, however, he was snapped back to reality. He remembered the brutal care they gave him before. A full-body beating that left no bone untouched. Waking from his daydream, he stared at the purple-haired guy's face. He looked so familiar. Just like an opponent from his past, especially that pompous, holier-than-thou attitude. Meanwhile, the pursuing mob grew more ferocious. Their only choice was to make a run for it. If they could just reach the Western Territories, they'd finally be safe, because that land belonged to the Sword Clan. The problem was, he'd already made an enemy of them and was now on their kill-on-sight list. But he couldn't care less. Death wasn't something he feared. He pressed on, only to find fields stained crimson red. He wondered who could have caused such a scene, but then suddenly spoke into the empty air. "I'm not a fan of those who lurk in the shadows." As if on cue, a figure emerged from hiding, mocking a certain sect leader for appearing in such a backwater place. But the woman named Soso paid him no mind. She was here to borrow the power of the man before her. For his part, he had no desire to clash with the demonic cult. And with that, he vanished into a cloud of smoke. Elsewhere, No's group was engaged in some extreme sports, mountain sliding instead of snowboarding. This trip would cost him. He was definitely going to need a new pair of shoes after this. His subordinate was just wondering if they'd even survive. When they screeched to a halt, an enemy stood blocking their path. This time was different. A man with a scar on his face stood with his legs wide apart. That was definitely a high ranker. So he quickly warned his partner to run for his life if he got the chance. And then, the chaotic brawl began again. The moment their eyes met, No slammed his iron-like forehead into the man's head. Suddenly, some coward tried a sneak attack from behind with a spear. A sword slashed past his waist, knocking the attacker out cold. He was hit so hard his soul almost left his body. Yet the so-called master just stood there, analyzing the flurry of strikes. One after another, the swords missed their mark, and the attackers were sent flying in every direction. At last, the master deigned to make his move. He put on a show, slowly unsheathing his blade. And No knew this would be a tough fight. He faced his foe, leaping into the air and landing with a knee crushing the sword below him. Then, he finished it with his signature iron headbutt technique. The man was left clutching his bleeding head, but still posturing. "You won't escape, son of 𝒕𝒓𝒂𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒍," he yelled, before scrambling away as fast as he could. By now, our main character was completely gassed. If another group showed up, and just like that, as if his wish was granted, a whole group of fighters descended from above, followed by an old man carrying every kind of sword imaginable on his back. One glance was all it took to know this geezer was on a whole other level. But the purple-haired kid didn't even flinch. He knew that even if he were captured, nothing truly bad would happen to him. Without a word, our main character snatched a sword from the ground and in a flash, pressed the cold steel against the boy's neck. With a smirk, he declared, "I've been waiting for this moment for a long, long time." His plan? End the kid right here, before he could be taken. The kidnapper broke out in a cold sweat, his voice trembling as he tried to stop him. Just moments ago, the purple-haired kid looked so smug, but now, he was being choked so hard that he started losing control of his bladder. Seeing the kid's face twist in agony, our hero only tightened his grip, drawing out a pained scream. He had successfully cornered them. The captor was in a full-blown panic. If the purple-haired kid died, he couldn't imagine how he'd explain it to his master. He promised to let our hero go safely, but as soon as he heard the condition, that he would only release the boy at the 3-gate pass, the deal was instantly rejected. Seeing this, our hero didn't waste words, and just squeezed the kid's neck again. This little threat worked like a charm. The man immediately cleared a path. Seeing the others still itching to draw their swords, our hero issued a final warning. "Let's see who's faster." The leader had no choice but to order his men back. Soon, they were escorted to the docks. Since he couldn't exactly swim across, he still needed a boat to arrive. Of course, he couldn't be shameless enough to ask the enemy to prepare one for him. So, our hero took a deep breath and roared out a single name, Maguk, so loudly it nearly deafened everyone present. But even after screaming his lungs out, there was still no sign of anyone. The captor was losing his patience, drawing 2 blades, ready to make his move. But just in the nick of time, a boat appeared on the horizon, saving his skin. He was so relieved he could have cried. Meanwhile, the sleeping children suddenly woke up in unison and walked outside, where their nanny found them. She explained that after the upcoming match, once No returned, the kids would be transferred to a normal school. Hearing this, none of them wanted to go. It was because Bong-gun, the nanny's son, was a student there. That kid disliked them, because his mother was always busy taking care of them instead of spending time at home. The children were surprisingly understanding. They could feel Bong-gun's loneliness, seeing the nanny dote on them. Hearing their thoughts, the nanny pulled the 3 kids into a warm hug, wishing they could all become closer. And of course, to these kids, the nanny's family was their own family. There was no difference. The nanny finally started to understand her own son's feelings. But she also knew it was thanks to No that her family had a roof over their heads and food on the table. Afterwards, 𝒂𝒂 split off to go study, driven by a powerful desire to learn. But her two older brothers had no such ambitions. Their logic? No, couldn't even read, so who would check their work? They could just scribble whatever they wanted. They said they were going to study, but in reality, 𝒂𝒂 was just as distracted. She was captivated by the old man's story of the legendary Ice Queen. Her eyes sparkled with admiration, wanting to meet such an incredible person. But the truth was, the queen had retired at the age of 40. Meeting her would be an impossible challenge, requiring a perilous journey across the heavenly mountains and knowledge of the local tongue. The story was getting intense, until the old man claimed that he himself had once been invited to her palace. That instantly earned him a skeptical look from 𝒂𝒂. There was no way she'd believe that. Seeing her doubt, the old man quickly changed the subject to work. So, the two of them stood in front of the store, sweeping. But every one of the old man's movements was perfectly replicated by 𝒂𝒂. In the end, what they were doing was less like sweeping, and more like drawing circles. Even cleaning the house required a special skill, 100% concentration of one's inner energy just to control the broom. Though 𝒂𝒂 was a brilliant and gifted child, she was always insecure about being a girl. This made the old man fall into a deep, worried silence, hoping nothing bad would ever happen to this precious child. Back on the docks, as the boat drew closer, No waved his hands in joy. Seeing this, the enemies immediately surrounded him, afraid their prey was about to escape. Seeing his dear friend had arrived to save his sorry hide, he was moved to tears. But before he could even run over for a hug, 𝒂𝒂𝒂's greeting was a fist to the face. He had once sworn to kill No on sight. The two of them were once closer than brothers, both skinny as sticks, sharing every hardship and every stolen meal. They'd get beaten up together and still laugh about it. But now, 𝒂𝒂💂 was boiling with rage, swinging his fists directly at No's face. He managed to dodge, but one punch still grazed his side. As they continued their dance of one attacking and the other dodging, No suddenly ran toward the enemy. He pointed at 𝒂𝒂💂, shouting that he was the real culprit looking for the purple-haired kid. This threw the entire group into chaos, and they drew their swords on 𝒂𝒂💂. Enraged, 𝒂𝒂💂 was about to retaliate, but No didn't care. He ordered his subordinate to get the kid onto the boat. Hearing the command, the man quickly hoisted the purple-haired kid onto his back and sprinted for the ship. The situation was critical, with one group of enemies blocking the path and another giving chase. No had no choice but to grit his teeth, turn back, grab both of them, and toss them onto the boat like a couple of sandbags. Seeing they had landed safely on deck, No also tried to scramble aboard, but 𝒂𝒂💂 ordered his men to stop him. In an instant, bows were drawn, ready to fire. As the arrows rained down, No used every ounce of his strength to accelerate. With his current power, the projectiles looked like they were moving in slow motion. He effortlessly slapped them aside with his bare hands. In his eyes, this was nothing more than a game. But, to the onlookers, No's movements were a masterful, lightning-fast display of skill. But he hadn't gotten far before his consciousness started to grow heavy. From behind, 𝒂𝒂💂 had landed a devastating blow right on his back, a hit that couldn't possibly miss. But No used the forward momentum from the fall to perform a roll on the ground, then launched himself from the dock toward the ship, defying the laws of gravity. He completely shattered Newton's physics with the law of Tom and Jerry, grabbing onto the ship's mast. Seeing him perched safely up there, 𝒂𝒂💂 still refused to give up and gave another order: fire at will. But he hadn't paid for the service yet, so they weren't about to listen. 𝒂𝒂💂 then activated his technique, his entire arm becoming enveloped in a swirling vortex of water. The sheer pressure silenced everyone. A second ago, No was looking worried, knowing that taking a hit like that would mean a trip to the afterlife. And a second later, the water from 𝒂𝒂💂💂's hand slammed directly into his face. Seeing No take a direct hit, everyone thought he would be knocked into the sea, but they never expected that he would use the impact. He reached out with a powerful, sturdy arm, grabbing onto the ship's mast to keep from falling. But he used far too much strength, causing the entire mast to groan and tilt with him. It leaned in the direction No was falling, sending everyone into a panic. They all scrambled to get away as the massive mast came crashing down with a deafening thud, leaving everyone stunned. But No simply stood up and boarded the ship, as confident as a god walking among mortals. He might have been tattered, soaking wet, and a bit of a mess, but he still looked unbelievably cool. He spat a mouthful of blood just as 𝒂𝒂💂💂 came running over, but it was too late. Both of No's feet were planted firmly on the deck, officially making him a guest. 𝒂𝒂💂💂 couldn't do a thing. He turned and unleashed his fury on the crew. "You useless fools! You couldn't even stop one weirdo like this?" But before he could even finish, the enemy was upon them. He flew in at breakneck speed, but No just stood there, completely unfazed. It wasn't that he couldn't dodge, it's that he didn't need to. In an instant, a wall of crystal-clear water erupted to block the attack. No had the absolute protection of 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕, who warned them to stop the fight, but they just wouldn't listen. Fueled by rage, they charged forward again, and for their trouble, each one received a powerful blow to the head. 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕 was absolutely livid. "I told you to stop! Do you want to go sleep in a shark's belly?" Yet the mob, all sharing a single brain cell, rushed forward again, completely unaware that on the open sea, this man was the law. Instantly, a massive water dragon materialized and swept the fearless fools off their feet. They were sent flying back into the unforgiving ocean, striking terror into their leader's heart. He frantically looked around, but couldn't see any of his followers. He called for reinforcements to charge forward, but No knew that with 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕 standing on the sea, his enemies didn't stand a chance. They tried to use their superior numbers to overwhelm him, but the moment 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕 raised his arms, powerful streams of water erupted, slamming into their chests. He then shifted his hands forward, and the water followed his command. It crashed down upon them, washing them away. Seeing his men vanish into the depths, buried at sea, the leader realized the man before him was no ordinary being. He stated his name, demanding to know 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕's identity, but the second he heard the name, Hoenn 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕, his entire expression changed. He was filled with dread, for this was one of the 9 demons who ruled the ocean. Seeing his attitude flip on a dime, No couldn't help but wonder since when his best friend had become such a hotshot. But this only made 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕 even angrier. He knew exactly who he was, a sea monster, yet he dared to violate the laws of his ship. The man tried to make an excuse, claiming he was so focused on chasing an enemy of the Alliance that he hadn't noticed. Hearing this, 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕 was dumbfounded. He pointed directly at No's scruffy face. This pathetic-looking guy, him? The comment made No, who was squatting humbly, feel a bit awkward. The leader tried another tactic. If 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕 helped him capture No, his entire sect would owe him a great favor. But 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕 couldn't care less about such useless promises. He didn't want to protect a guy like No either, but fighting was forbidden on his ship. They could take him, as long as they didn't use violence. Once they were off the ship, they could slice and dice No all they wanted. But as long as they were on board, the law was the law. And so, they came to an agreement. They would wait until the ship reached its destination. Then, they could have their pound of flesh. 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕 even said he was looking forward to the show, which caught No completely off guard. After a quick calculation, the leader realized he could still make his deadline within 2 days. He agreed to the terms and had his men stand down. 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕 was still fuming, but this shipment couldn't be delayed. He raised the sails and set off. Meanwhile, back home, Old Man 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕 received a terrible report. His soldiers had been ambushed. All 3 captains were dead. He immediately decided to leave the city, but was stopped. Such a move could be misunderstood and might even lead to war. After giving orders to his brother-in-law, 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕's face was a mask of grim determination. If the Murim decided to invade, they would be utterly annihilated. As for 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕, he was trying to have a deep, soulful moment at sea, but it was impossible with an annoying pest buzzing beside him. Still, he remained calm. He pointed toward the mainland. "It would be better for everyone if I just dropped this nuisance off there," he muttered. In response, No began torturing his ears with a non-stop, terrible rap. 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕's anger swelled to a boiling point, and he was tempted to break his own rules right then and there. But No shamelessly kept teasing and prodding him until he couldn't take it anymore. An aura of water began to form around his arm. No realized he'd gone too far, breaking into a cold sweat as he quietly backed away. Now that things had calmed down, he finally had a chance to check on his 2 companions, but his subordinate hit him with a devastating question that sent No's simple mind into a spiral. Why did we ask for help from the one person who's always trying to kill you? After a moment of thought, No finally came up with an answer. Because after a guy like 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕 kills you, at least he'll give you a proper burial. The response left his 2 followers utterly speechless. After all, out here in the middle of the ocean, the only other option was becoming shark food. He acted tough on the outside, but deep down, No was seriously worried. If he died out here, would his children be thrown out of their home? At that thought, his fighting spirit blazed anew. He absolutely could not die here. Meanwhile, back at home, the kids were training harder than ever. Hoenn was still seething over those punks who dared to look down on his magnificent father. Every punch and every kick was sharp, solid, and decisive. As if venting his rage, he let out a powerful shout, startling the 2 younger children. What in the world was that? Myung was completely baffled, not sure what was going on. He wondered if his big brother had lost his mind. But as the eldest, Hun felt something was wrong. The martial arts they were learning at school were completely different from what their father had taught them. Myung didn't notice, but Seo knew exactly what the difference was. She stepped forward to show her brothers. Before they even knew what was happening, she lifted her leg and brought it crashing down with the force of a lightning bolt. This was the technique No had taught them. Without pausing, Seo continued. She raised her leg again for a hooking kick, swinging from the outside in. Hun reacted instantly, raising his arm to block. But then he saw his little sister charging forward with a punch, and quickly changed his defense. He defended, but Seo instantly switched her form, her leg arcing high. The kick was about to land before Hun could even react, a classic move from the academy. A style riddled with weaknesses. In their last exchange, despite attacking 3 times, Seo only managed to land a single hit. Of course, unleashing countless attacks like that was pushing him to his absolute limit. But slowly and surely, his father's direct strike teachings were breaking them down, one by one. It was an instant kill, but against stronger foes, he stood no chance. That didn't mean his father's lessons were wrong, just that No was a different kind of beast entirely. In the ancient chronicles, some beings are simply one of a kind, and while they may not possess the God-given talent of their father, No, sheer determination can forge its own path. It can turn a fragile piece of paper into a weapon that can shatter stone. This profound concept left the 2 brothers even more bewildered than before. Their sister could only sigh and walk away, leaving the 2 to their baffling training. Hun began mimicking what Seo had said, trying it out from every angle with a comical seriousness. Whether he was getting it right was anyone's guess, but it was certainly entertaining to watch. Suddenly, a voice cut through the air. The 2 spun around to see what it was, and were met with the bizarre sight of 2 old men's heads, grinning from behind a wall. Their heads bobbed like something out of a horror film. When questioned, the old geezers claimed they were just passing by. But the scene was far more unsettling, because from a distance, it was clear. Both men were floating, their feet hovering above a grassy grave mound. Meanwhile, Soso had come to this very place to pay respects to her big brother. Just then, the heavens split open with thunder, and a torrential downpour began. The rain lashed down, as if the spirit of her dear big brother stood right before her. Her attendants, seeing the storm, rushed to escort her to safety. But Soso stubbornly refused to leave. That is, until word arrived. A band of fiends calling themselves the Gu clan were terrorizing a nearby village. Instantly, Soso's demeanor shifted back to her usual, commanding self. With a powerful aura, she ordered her retinue to return ahead of her, promising to follow shortly. Meanwhile, 4 figures stood in a tense standoff, yet there were only 2 distinct faces among them. That's because they were all identical twin brothers. Hun recalled their nanny saying that as they grew, their differences would show. But looking at these 2 ancient men, who were still carbon copies of each other, it was because they had been together from birth to old age. And as fate would have it, some twins share a unique spiritual link, able to communicate without a single word. They could understand each other's very thoughts. This revelation overjoyed the old masters. They had finally found the perfect successors. Once invited inside, the 2 elders immediately commented on the boys' speed and fluid movements, but they didn't forget to shower praise on their instructor, calling him a truly magnificent master. This little bit of flattery worked wonders on the 2 brothers, who were still salty about other kids downplaying their father's power. The 2 old masters were sly, seizing on the boys' fierce devotion to their dad and laying the praise on thick. They praised No to the high heavens, calling him a peerless talent, a hero among heroes. But then, with surprising honesty, they admitted that everything they knew was just from eavesdropping. Then, they started hyping themselves up. "We may look like a couple of old hens," they cackled, "but there's plenty of fight in us yet." And right in front of the 2 boys, they decided to put on a demonstration to truly open their eyes. The first elder exploded into motion, leaping about with impossible agility before thrusting his arm towards his brother. Instantly, the other met him with a strike as fast as lightning. To the untrained eye, it looked like a meaningless, chaotic dance, but in reality, a fierce battle was unfolding. They were striking and dodging blows so fast, their movements were just a blur to the naked eye. The 2 boys could only stand there, jaws on the floor, completely unable to believe that these 2 old geezers possessed such overwhelming power. Their speed accelerated, blurring until it seemed as if 4 figures were locked in combat. Each powerful clash of their palms unleashed a terrifying shockwave of wind that blasted outwards. When they finally stopped, they turned to see the 2 kids clapping wildly, their eyes shining. Seeing Hun and Myung looking at them with pure adoration, the masters saw their chance. They offered to teach the boys their unique martial art. Their only reason? It was because they were also twins. This simple reason was enough for the boys, who agreed enthusiastically without a hint of suspicion. And so, the masters declared they must perform the 9 ceremonial bows to be accepted as their disciples. At this point, the brothers were completely spellbound by the display of power and saw no issue. They eagerly lined up, ready to perform the rite. But, before their knees could even touch the ground, a chillingly familiar voice echoed through the air, cursing her 2 stinking, idiotic brothers. Meanwhile, 𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒍 ventured deeper and deeper into the desolate village. It was eerily silent, not a single soul in sight. Then, she spotted a lone boy, diligently harvesting rice in a field. She realized this small child bore a striking resemblance to her big brother. The moment the boy saw her, he urgently motioned for her to get down. When 𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒍 didn't immediately understand, he quickly rushed over and tugged at her sleeve, pulling her away. The resemblance to her big brother was uncanny. The boy led her to a small house and into an old, dusty storeroom filled with hanging vegetables. Inside, the boy whispered a single warning: "Don't make a sound," before darting back outside to calmly resume his work as if nothing had happened. It wasn't long before a troop of menacing soldiers thundered into the village on horseback. They were here searching for any sign of 𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒍. Naturally, the boy played dumb, acting as if he'd never seen her. But one of the soldiers wasn't buying it. He dismounted his horse, and without a single word, he ruthlessly struck the boy, sending him flying. He then stood with his hands on his hips, cursing, before kicking the child again. But even covered in blood, the boy didn't utter a single word, which finally convinced the soldier that perhaps the kid was telling the truth. With no sign of 𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒍, they quickly departed, annoyed at having wasted their time. Only when their shadows had completely vanished did she emerge. She checked to see if the boy was still alive, a soft, enchanting smile on her face. She recalled a time when No was balancing on his head, and 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒐𝒏𝒈𝒆𝒔𝒕 came running with news that he'd found their master's whereabouts. But contrary to what he expected, No seemed completely indifferent. After all, the Henan continent was vast. Finding him would be a miracle. Besides, their master was just an ordinary old man among a sea of extraordinary people. But 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒐𝒏𝒈𝒆𝒔𝒕 was determined to find a lead. While No nonchalantly continued his headstand, he had no desire to search for someone who had left without a single word of goodbye. The moment their boat docked, 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒂𝒑 kicked No off the ship in front of a massive crowd just waiting to tear him apart. Seeing he was about to be served on a platter, No began his final plea, begging them to spare his disciple and the purple-haired boy. He then mentioned his own children, which stunned 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒂𝒑. He never knew this idiot had spread his DNA around. No spun a tragic tale of his 3 poor children, motherless and soon to be fatherless. He fiercely begged for the other 2 to live, so they could repay their debt by taking care of his kids. After getting a nod of agreement, No flashed a grin and demanded they set sail the second his feet touched the ground. And just like that, No launched himself off the ship. His disciple tried to follow, but was held back. Honoring their pact, 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒂𝒑 immediately ordered the crew to weigh anchor. The enemy leader panicked, screaming for them to return the purple-haired boy, their primary target. But 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒂𝒑 calmly explained, "A guest on his ship cannot be forcibly removed. That's why No could make such a gamble. For the enemy captain, returning without the boy meant being buried alive. So, even if it meant fighting a sea monster, he had to get his target back." He issued a challenge directly to 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒂𝒑. "Hand over the boy," he roared, "or you become my sworn enemy." 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒂𝒑 was more than ready. Their leader could only roar in frustration. "Get on that boat and crush him," he commanded his men. But No remained perfectly calm, taking a deep, measured breath. He could overcome this storm. Seeing the horde rushing towards him, No raised his sword and charged. He could clearly see the path of every attack. Parrying their blades was child's play. He then clenched his fist and drove it straight into one man's gut. The remaining enemy charged in, full of fighting spirit, while No's hands were full, but his movements were fluid and free. He'd block one, then send another flying with a single punch. His sword strokes were sharp and decisive, yet inside, No's mind was a mess. He had no idea what to do. Why were these men trying so desperately to die? Just then, an enemy from behind swung his blade straight down. No didn't even flinch. He took the blow as if it were nothing, then spun around in a flash, kicking the man square in the face. Seizing the chance, he dropped down and grabbed his opponent's leg. No matter how much the guy punched and screamed, "Let go, you pervert!" No clung on with grim determination, hoisting him into the air. With a surge of strength, he spun the man in a circle before hurling him back into the mob. But his eyes never left the ship, and he saw their leader had already boarded, looking for his prize. Without a second thought, No became a human battering ram, charging full speed towards the vessel as bodies flew left and right. As he carved through the grunts, a stray attack flew his way. No dodged instantly, but the situation on the boat was becoming critical. 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒄 was unleashing his fury. His entire body was shrouded in tendrils of water, coiling around him like living serpents. The water arrows shot towards him were all effortlessly blocked. Seeing his opponent was tough, 𝒂𝒂💄 raised both hands. Orbs of water materialized on each side, intercepting the enemy's sword and sending him reeling backward. No, still watching from below, peeked his head up, only to be spotted instantly. But the enemy leader's eyes were fixed on a different sight. All of his soldiers were unconscious on the ground. It was then the leader realized No was no ordinary foe. In a flash, he launched himself off the boat. The sheer weight behind his Dao's swing was immense. No could only raise his sword to block, but the force of the impact sent a sickening crack through his blade. Knowing he was outmatched in strength, No backflipped away, but his enemy gave him no quarter. In the split second before the blade claimed his life, No managed to dodge. Yet even as he moved, he wasn't fast enough. The blade sliced across his chest, followed by 3 lightning-fast stabs. But of course, our main character wasn't the type to just lie there and take it. In the blink of an eye, he appeared right in front of his foe, their eyes locked. "If you value that pathetic life of yours," No whispered. He attacked from 2 directions at once. His sword came from above, while his leg was ready to deliver a devastating kick from below. As the man leaped to dodge the kick, his face moved even closer, to the razor-sharp edge of the blade. Luckily, the man was a master in his own right. He flipped in midair, redirecting his own sword straight down, intending to skewer No, but No charged forward, ready for a bloody clash. Both men threw everything they had into a final strike. Neither would yield an inch. The result was inevitable, a storm of shattered pride and broken bones. Everyone watched in stunned silence as the 2 combatants crashed into each other and collapsed to the ground. When No opened his eyes, he saw a galaxy of stars. Before he could even grasp the situation, overwhelming pain surged through him, forcing a groan from his lips. The muscles in his arm began to twist unnaturally. His entire body convulsed, causing his subordinate to scream out in worry. Yet, despite it all, No seemed fine, his eyes fluttering open. Still, he was lost in a daze, unsure if he was among the living or the dead. But one thing was certain, he would never surrender. He'd sue, that's what he'd do, and he'd slam the judge's head into the ground if he dared rule him dead. Seeing his old friend standing beside him, he let out a sigh of relief. It seemed the guy had enough of a heart to save him after all. Turns out, once their leader was defeated, the remaining enemies knew fear and tucked tail and ran. Otherwise, they'd all be pushing up daisies by now. Still, No demanded a physician, his body aching as if it had been torn into 100 pieces. But the one who truly needed an ambulance wasn't him. It was the Murim leader. How on earth could a nobody like No defeat a high-ranking martial artist? Seeing that 𝒂𝒂💄 wasn't a complete monster, No shamelessly asked for a ride. Though 𝒂𝒂💄 threatened to feed him to the sharks, their boat had already begun to move. Meanwhile, the chief of the Murim alliance, a man with 2 long braids, slammed his desk in a fit of rage. They had lost all trace of No, hundreds of their men, defeated by a single, nameless warrior. Naturally, they wouldn't let this slide. 2 masters were dispatched with a single order: capture the purple-haired man at all costs. The report they received was alarming. It mentioned the appearance of the Furious Blade and the Heavenly Dragon. Because of this, they immediately reinforced their defenses. Soon, the non-aggression treaty would be nothing but paper. The chief was left wondering, what was the Heavenly Dragon Society scheming? Meanwhile, No was living his best life. He was sprawled out on the deck, enjoying the ride. The sight made 𝒂𝒂💄's eye twitch, wanting to chop him into 100 pieces for fish food. No just casually bragged about his kids, his 9-year-olds, who were still cute as a button. He knew if 𝒂𝒂💄 hadn't stepped in, he never would have had the chance to see his children again. This only enraged 𝒂𝒂💄 further. No wasn't even looking for their master. For someone like 𝒂𝒂💄, who had no other family, that loss was everything. But No stood by his choice. His children were a gift, a chance he was given. No knew he couldn't defeat 𝒂𝒂💄 if the man truly wanted him dead, but for his kids. If he died, 𝒂𝒂💄 would have to take responsibility for raising them. Before he could finish his sentence, a swift kick sent him flying, nearly knocking his teeth out. The onlookers could only stare in shock. No just pathetically covered his head, enduring the storm of 𝒂𝒂💄's fury until he was beaten half to death. Only when he was bruised from head to toe did the man finally stop. But when asked to take No to Xi'an, 𝒂𝒂💄's rage flared up once more. Just as he was about to strike, No started bawling his eyes out, playing the victim. "Sure, take me, but you gotta pay up." To No, 200 was a fortune, as big as a wagon wheel. But 𝒂𝒂💄 explained it was a bargain price. The journey to Xi'an would take 20 days, and since No was now tangled up with the Murim, he would have to cough up 200 gold coins. 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕𝒊𝒂𝒍 was wondering if he'd have to sell a kidney, when suddenly, his disciple beside him puffed out his chest and said he'd cover everything. 𝒂𝒂𝒓's face lit up. He'd forgotten his disciple was ridiculously rich. Instantly putting on a professional face, he negotiated a price of 500 gold for the boat ride and any potential incidents. But 𝒂𝒂𝒓, fearing he was being scammed, demanded a deposit first. His disciple just dusted himself off and pulled out a gem brighter than a lantern to trade. It was worth well over 500 gold, but the boatman was incredibly picky. He only accepted cold, hard cash. If they didn't have it, the only other thing he'd take was the Azure Dragon's fishing rod. Of course, no one had that, so they were forcefully kicked off the boat. But just then, the purple-haired young master appeared and agreed to the deal, but with a change of route. 𝒂𝒂𝒓 immediately accepted. The fishing rod wasn't his to lose, anyway. If the kid lied, he could just kill him. 𝒂𝒂𝒓 grinned inwardly. He was certain this kid was another young master from a powerful family. Meanwhile, the children were receiving a private lesson, a 2-on-2 session, handled with extreme professionalism. The twins stepped forward to demonstrate the moves. Both Hun and Myung didn't question why, they just followed along. They copied the movements perfectly, like flawless machines. This sight brought immense joy to the twin masters. They had truly found two geniuses. But So, sitting nearby, judged them as if they were monsters. They looked absolutely hideous, nothing like the divine crane immortals they had boasted about earlier. This made the little girl suspicious. Were the two men in front of her truly master-level cultivators? Her cautious nature far beyond her years left the two old men stunned, and so, one of them decided to show her. He took slow, deliberate steps into the air, walking across the sky before gently descending. But even that wasn't enough to convince our little old lady, because according to her father, anyone in the martial world could perform such a feat. This made the two masters break out in a cold sweat. This was a skill they had spent their entire lives mastering. And now, she was saying everyone knew how to do it? But they tried to explain, stating that this was their unique specialty, a different discipline that couldn't be compared. But Seo immediately refuted their claims. Her two brothers, who had been watching, finally grew annoyed and spoke up, because she was slowing down their training. As for Seo, she was terrified. Her two dense older brothers were about to be scammed and have their organs sold. With everyone believing they were right, a massive argument erupted. Seeing the two little ones trying so hard to protect them, the two old masters were moved to the brink of tears. It was truly a touching sight. But Seo, despite being the youngest, held her ground firmly. As soon as her father returned, their little scam would be over. Seeing Myung and Hun progressing at a dizzying rate, even Chun-in had to give his praise. But he couldn't help but wonder, who exactly was the father of these children? He definitely couldn't be some ordinary soldier. Seeing the kids train with such passion because they found it fun made him even more pleased. He wouldn't have to worry about the next match. Hun would definitely secure the victory. For now, he just needed to wait for No to return so they could discuss the kids' education. But the immediate problem was Seo. She wasn't attending his class. Of course, it wasn't because she was being diligent or hated him, but because she was busy with her sunflower, gossiping across the continent with old Bake. When he heard that the other two were being taught by a pair of strange old men, he didn't judge. He figured it was a good thing, because it meant they were undoubtedly powerful, and since they were twins, they might even be the twin demons of legend. But suddenly, the little girl changed the subject, accusing old Bake of lying about being a master himself. He hastily tried to explain, but she refused to believe him unless he demonstrated, by flying for her. Of course, he refused. He had made a vow long ago to only use his martial arts in times of absolute necessity. Seo finally realized she had spoken out of turn and shut her mouth. But her curiosity got the better of her. Who was it that placed such a cruel curse on him? It turns out, old Bake himself had been overconfident in his own power and made a foolish bet, which led to his current state. Meanwhile, the opponent who had clashed with No was now lying in a bed, receiving fluids. He hadn't been careless or underestimated, no, yet this was the outcome. No one could believe a master of his caliber had been defeated by a member of the Heavenly Dragon Society in a land with no renowned warriors, but having experienced it firsthand, he knew the truth best. His techniques had been completely ineffective against No. The practice of forging a diamond body is incredibly difficult, with a tiny success rate. The only one known to have achieved it was the Shaolin Grandmaster. All others lacked the skill, and yet, this man's appearance had changed everything. It was unbelievable. Not a single one of his sword attacks had left even a scratch. Hearing that No possessed a body as hard as steel sent a shiver down the braided man's spine, causing him to break out in a cold sweat. After telling the other man to rest, he walked outside with a grim expression. He called down a person who was hiding on the rooftop and gave them a mission. Elsewhere, the head of the Dragon Martial Arts School, Kim Tae-hwan, was sitting and reflecting on how many people he'd wronged in his life when he received a report. A member of the Martial Alliance had been beaten to a pulp, and now they were suspecting him. But it wasn't just the two of them who knew about this. A person named Yi Yi had also sniffed out the situation. He was a child sent to the school for Master Kim to look after, basically making him a glorified babysitter. Just then, Chunin burst through the door and was respectfully greeted as the vice principal. He was there to brag about the new disciples he had accepted. This made the schoolmaster extremely excited, shaking him like a leaf as he asked about their height, weight, gender, names, and where they lived. And so, the two of them sat down to discuss the nation's future talents. Chunin immediately dismissed the 7 children of some official, saying their skills were weaker than a bunch of newbies. He then began to glorify his 3 new disciples, talking about how adorable and talented they were. Anyone watching would have thought he was some kind of creep. In truth, Chunin had come today to ask for the schoolmaster's help in digging up information on the children's father, because all of No's information had been heavily concealed by old Hukdo. This made them suspicious. What could possibly be so special about a mere soldier that it needed to be hidden so thoroughly? Hearing the name No Gajang, the schoolmaster realized he was the sole survivor of many difficult missions. He wondered if No would even make it back alive from his current one. No one could possibly know. What in the world was old man Hukdo thinking? Hearing a sudden scream, the nanny frantically rushed over to check on the children, only to be greeted by a shocking sight. It was Seo, struggling desperately in her brother's arms. She thrashed about, kicking and punching with pure annoyance, but No was stubbornly determined to bite her adorable, chubby cheeks. Thanks to their devoted nanny, his children were saved from disaster. But seeing his 2 sons acting like a pair of clowns, No couldn't take it anymore and switched his target. He grabbed one in each hand, ready to deliver a verbal lashing. But it turned out this perfect family moment was all just a dream No was lost in. After so many days at sea, reality hit hard. His subordinate was still wrestling with seasickness, heaving his guts out over and over again, as if for the first time. A strange thought crossed No's dense mind. This kid looked surprisingly feminine, but he quickly shoved the idea aside, a shiver running down his spine just thinking about it. Seeing his ride-or-die companion looking so pathetic, a rare moment of compassion struck him. He decided to teach the kid martial arts when they returned, sparking pure joy on his subordinate's face. Finally, a chance to stop being useless. Spotting Maguk leisurely fishing, No wanted to warm up with a friendly spar. But of course, Maguk wanted nothing to do with the guy. The blockhead completely forgot that he was still injured. But after No taunted him with a few choice words like, "What's wrong, baby?" Maguk had a change of heart. He decided he'd rather beat the living daylights out of No instead. Before a roaring crowd of onlookers, the two finally faced off. But No just flailed his arms and legs, breathing heavily, like a woman about to give birth. Maguk, watching from the side, was already losing his patience. After what felt like an eternity, No finally seemed to enter his climax, taking a deep, dramatic breath. Everyone braced for something monumental to happen. But in the end, not even a tiny squeak escaped him. No had failed yet again. This was the consequence of his master leaving on a journey, without leaving behind the rest of the secret manual. Maguk immediately laid into him, calling him a shrimp-brained fool with a head full of nothing but crap for not being able to remember a thing. It was a picture scroll his master had left him. With no epic clash to watch, the disappointed crowd began to disperse in a huff of indignation. After checking that the coast was clear, No scurried over and whispered something in Maguk's ear. Whatever it was, it sent Maguk into a rage, who landed a blow that nearly cracked his skull. Just as they were about to tear into each other, Purple Hair suddenly appeared, sporting a completely different aura after his recovery. He looked every bit the part of a wealthy young master. But Purple Hair hadn't forgotten about the legendary Huilong fishing rod he'd bought from the Tai Kong shop to trade for No's help. What the hell? You dare hold this over me as a debt when I did it to save your life? This kid was a little devil. Purple Hair knew full well that No was stuck on his martial arts formula. He couldn't help but jab at him, asking how his pole dancing lessons were coming along. But despite the mockery, he was genuinely curious, feeling like he'd seen those techniques somewhere before. He remembered trying to decipher the master's drawings himself. He looked from every angle and mimicked the poses, but couldn't understand a single thing. Defeated, he simply gave up and went to sleep with his kids. By the time Seo woke him up, the The children had turned their father into their personal playground, and the secret manual was completely soaked at the head of the bed. The moment he realized what happened, it was too late. You never know what you have until it's gone. Not only did it have a unique of new fragrance, but the ink was smeared beyond recognition. How was he supposed to train now? All No could do was scream in frustration at his little monsters. He tried desperately to reconstruct the techniques from memory, but all he got for his trouble was more ridicule from Maguk. Meanwhile, the boy who was beaten to a pulp was back to diligently working the fields. He noticed Soso was still there, even as dusk settled, and urged her to leave quickly. But in her eyes, this little boy looked just like her great leader. She had to know his name. Upon learning, the boy was called Sun Yu. Soso pulled out a priceless artifact. She instructed him to return it to the Yo household, promising he would receive everything he ever desired. When the boy looked up from the object in his hands, she had vanished into thin air. Even though she was gone, Sun Yu called out a warning for Soso to be careful of the Gu tribe. But the boy had no idea that deep within the forest, their entire encampment had already been wiped from existence. Not a single soul had survived. As time passed, the two boys continued their training with Chun-In. CEO diligently practiced drawing her circles, day after day. Only their father remained utterly lazy, spending his days fishing and bothering others. But everyone's jaws dropped when Purple Hair reeled in a colossal fish. At last, the day of the showdown arrived. The grudge match had begun. The townsfolk swarmed in to watch the spectacle. Naturally, all eyes were on Vice Principal Chun-In and his newly accepted disciples. The officials finally understood the gravity of their situation. A win meant nothing, but a loss meant public humiliation and handing over territory. They desperately reassured each other that it would all be fine. They had to win, clinging to the deluded hope that 1 month of training was enough for their precious golden boys to crush the competition. The Hun brothers stood ready for anything, but Chun-In warned them again and again not to underestimate their opponents. After all, those kids were taught by the Academy's elite masters and had undoubtedly prepared meticulously for this fight. Still, he gently ruffled their hair to boost their spirits, urging them not to be afraid. He also saw it as a perfect chance to hear them call him Master. But the two were sharp and didn't fall for his trick, likely thanks to Seo's many warnings. The little girl then checked her brother's conditions, making sure they were stable. If they lost this battle, their father would never be able to hold his head high again. They swore they wouldn't let that happen. The manager stepped forward as the MC. Today's victor will one day lead the Heavenly Dragon Society, he boomed. The new contestants took the stage. On one side, 3. On the other, 2. And they were using weapons. The crowd erupted in protest, shouting about the blatant unfairness. To sway public opinion, the opponents began a flashy warm-up. Their elaborate spinning moves were meant to dazzle the audience, who murmured in awe, assuming they were the products of the strictest masters. In stark contrast, the Hun brothers simply jumped up and down, did a quick somersault into a firm stance, and began throwing solid, powerful punches into the air. This drew laughter from the crowd. Even though their fists didn't crackle with energy like a Pikachu, their resolve was unshakable. Today, they would make their father proud. If the world laughs at us, we'll just pretend to be deaf. They continued their simple routine. While the boys paid no mind, Chun-In glanced around nervously. Everyone was smiling. Even the grandmasters of the academy were present. He could only clench his jaw. Oh, we're screwed. At that moment, the sect master himself arrived to watch. He was curious to see if his younger brother's disciples had any real talent. In truth, the sect master had already investigated their father and discovered that No was a mercenary of great and terrible renown. But the most pressing issue was this. Now that everyone knew he was the legendary Chun-In, he worried no one would trust him enough to accept him as their children's master. For some reason, Old Man Hak-Do had kept this a secret. Just then, hearing the roaring cheers for Thunder Dragon, the old master suddenly stepped forward, instantly drawing every eye in the room. Seeing Thunder Dragon's interest in the two kids, Chun-In knew something was about to happen. But he never expected the old man to make such a grand move, offering to become a martial arts advisor for the victors. The entire hall erupted in a frenzy. The other old masters were ecstatic, seeing a golden opportunity for their own children to climb the ranks. But the surprises didn't end there. Another legendary figure suddenly appeared, the Flying Dragon. Everyone adored her, and it turned out she was here for one simple reason. She just couldn't stand by any longer. She wanted to show off a magnificent sword she'd recently acquired, intending to gift it to the ultimate winner. This sent a wave of regret through Chun-In. He'd let the kids debut before they even officially became his disciples, before they could accept him as their master. the announcer quickly ushered the two legends off the stage so the tournament could finally begin. And who should be in the crowd but old man Hak-do himself, here to see just how much No's children took after their father. Meanwhile, Chun-in was grumbling under his breath, wondering why these people were so nosy. Why did they have to interfere with his disciples' debut? His thoughts were interrupted when he saw a swarm of unrelated kids also rushing onto the stage, eager for a piece of the action. They all wanted the opportunity that Thunder Dragon and Flying Dragon offered. Watching the other kids warm up, Chun-in couldn't help but scoff. They weren't even a fraction as skilled as his own students. He tried to console his brother, promising to share one of his disciples later on. But one look at Seo's defiant face made that promise seem unlikely. As they watched the opponents on stage showing off their moves, both brothers had to admit they were impressive. Chun-in went over to give his two young prodigies a pep talk. But Myung was still upset about being mocked earlier. With his master's firm reassurance, he understood. All they had to do was go out there and shine brightly, and they would silence every single doubter. Make them eat their words. The announcer quickly called the first contestants to the stage. Myung stepped forward, his aura blazing with confidence, absolutely certain that victory was already his. Meanwhile, No was dozing off, yawning widely. But his eyes lit up when he saw his crew waiting for him by the shore. He didn't forget to offer them a few words of thanks. Just to keep things friendly, of course. Even though Ma-guk wanted to cut ties with him immediately, No shamelessly clung to them, refusing to let go. As they traveled by carriage, No couldn't help but daydream about the massive reward he'd receive, and seeing the arrogant attitude of the purple-haired kid, he was 100% certain this guy was from a rich and powerful family. That explained his cocky demeanor, which meant No's reward was going to be huge. He was already lost in fantasies of his life changing forever, leaving his two companions utterly speechless. Then, No casually mentioned they probably wouldn't see each other again, sending his subordinate into an existential crisis. Wait, did you forget your promise to teach my son martial arts? But besides his guard duty, No's only other hobby was drinking. So, his subordinate saw an opening, wanting to prove he could hang. He was promptly tasked with buying the drinks and snacks. And while No was getting ready for a drinking session, his son was preparing for a fierce showdown in the arena, with every single person in the crowd watching with bated breath. At last, the match began. Both contenders decided to rely on pure hand-to-hand combat. The brown-haired boy was still shaken from their last encounter, where he was nearly beaten senseless. He hesitated. Seeing his reluctance, Hun provoked him. "Come on, you little chicken." That was all it took. The boy instantly charged forward for a direct confrontation. Hun immediately countered with a swift punch, but both of their attacks grazed past each other. Hun decided to test his opponent's strength and took a punch head-on, but it was completely powerless. He didn't feel a single thing. In fact, Hun had the clear advantage, easily pushing him back. Annoyed by the flurry of useless punches that felt like mosquito bites, Hun had enough and unleashed a powerful palm strike. The blow sent his opponent flying several meters, crashing to the ground. Everyone stared in stunned silence. Even the Grandmaster was shocked that Hun possessed such a solid foundation. Seeing his chance, Chun-in seized the opportunity to proudly show off his disciple. The defeated boy wanted to get up, but was easily brushed aside. Then, the excuses started. He began complaining that this wasn't his true specialty. His true strength, he claimed, was in using weapons. This left the announcer at a loss for words. He glanced over at Chun-in, who already knew exactly what kind of trick they were trying to pull. He knew they were up to something, but he accepted the challenge without hesitation. He called Hun over for a quick mid-match briefing. "Your opponent is going to use a weapon now," he said, "so fighting bare-handed will put you at a disadvantage." To even the odds, Chun-in pulled out a legendary treasure. He carefully placed the item on the boy's hand. "This is quite expensive," he mentioned, but from the look on Hun's face, the boy had no idea what a few million even meant. "It's crafted from black silk," Chun-in explained. "It can block any weapon. A direct hit will feel like nothing more than a mosquito bite." Hearing how powerful it was, Hun immediately handed it back. He felt that using it would make the fight unfair, even if his opponent was armed with a weapon. What a genuinely good kid. 10 out of 10 points for sportsmanship. Hun returned to the fighting stage, seeing his opponent putting on a tough act. The kid knew he was planning to use some dirty tricks, but that wasn't going to work on him. The match resumed. His opponent immediately charged forward, sword in hand. Although Hun had already predicted the blade's trajectory, he never expected this. The sword suddenly changed direction, slashing sideways. The unexpected move caught Hun off guard, forcing him to leap back. The brown-haired boy pressed his advantage, rushing in once more. The attack was clearly a downward slash, but before Hun could even raise his guard, the blade pierced his shoulder. And what was truly strange was that after landing the hit, his opponent immediately pulled back again. He was waiting for another opening instead of pressing the attack. Hun took a deep breath to calm his nerves, but it was as if the sword itself could bend and curve at will. No matter how he predicted its movements, he was always wrong. Hun could do nothing but endure the blows. Yet, Chun-In wasn't worried in the slightest, because he could see the look in Hun's eyes, a gaze of pure, unbroken concentration. Even the Grandmaster was amazed, wondering who the master behind these children was. Just then, he noticed Seo, who was fuming on the sidelines, remembering the crucial lesson her father had taught them. Don't follow the path of the sword, you idiot. At that moment, something clicked in Hun's mind. He became clear-headed, realizing he needed to look beyond the blade. He had to see the bigger picture, just like he did in the first round. By focusing on the brown-haired boy's arm movements, Hun could now perfectly predict and block every single sword strike. His opponent was completely stunned, unable to believe what was happening. While he was still reeling in confusion, Hun ducked under a wide swing, closing the distance in an instant. As the sword whistled harmlessly over his head, Hun delivered a devastating blow right to his opponent's stomach. The impact was so powerful, it lifted the boy clean off his feet. And Hun was just getting started. He launched another kick, but it was suddenly intercepted by Lei Long, shocking everyone present. The old master feared a death was about to occur. With his intervention, the fight was over. Naturally, Hun was declared the winner amidst the thunderous cheers of the crowd. Meanwhile, the bald father-son duo were already hatching a devious new plan. With the two of them together, the squinty-eyed kid seized the opportunity, while Chun-In was distracted and still complaining about Lei Long, leaping onto the stage to start the next match. The last fight had just ended. The fighters hadn't even had a moment to rest before round 2 began. Do these people even know the rules? But that was their goal all along, to push Hun into a corner. They figured he'd be exhausted and easier to defeat. But for our young hero, taking on 3 opponents at once would still be a walk in the park. The crowd, however, saw the blatant injustice. Their outcry forced the 3 old masters to shut their mouths and let Hun take a short break. Chun-In immediately began massaging the boy's muscles. Though he felt some pain earlier, it had now completely vanished. Chun-In tried to entice the boy, saying that if he wanted to learn more amazing techniques, he had to become his disciple. But under Sao's watchful eye, Hun could only refuse, saying he'd decide after his father returned. In the martial world, whispers spread about the Death God Chamber. It was known as the most dominant of all martial sects. The martial arts chamber housed those who had mastered every deadly technique, while the Black Death Chamber were the kings of silencing others. Right now, the commander and vice commander of the Black Death Chamber had been assigned a new mission, to silence a member of the Heavenly Dragon Society. However, the vice commander had heard that a master from the Murim Alliance had been beaten half to death. He worried their new target might be the monster responsible for that attack and was hesitant to proceed. This mission reeked of danger, but the hulking commander was determined to see it through, refusing to believe they would cancel a job over a few rumors. And, if the Heavenly Dragon Society's member was a true master, they would simply eliminate him on the spot. Still, allowing the Vanguard team to be a star, get injured through carelessness, wasn't worth the risk. So, the vice commander requested some time to investigate the situation thoroughly. Meanwhile, the very man causing all this chaos was sticking his head out of a carriage, teasing his escorts before sinking back inside with a massive yawn. His boredom was making him furious. Nose muscles felt like they were turning to mush from sheer inactivity. But his 2 companions were enjoying the peace and quiet, having somehow acquired a whole stack of books. Despite the boredom, No was ecstatic about finally seeing his beloved children again, a fact he had repeated at least 1,000 times already. His subordinate was getting incredibly annoyed. Hearing the two bickering back and forth, Purple Hair could only gently stuff 2 pieces of paper into his ears. Once the world was silent, he happily returned to his book. Seeing his subordinate so focused on his children, No started fantasizing that the man was remaining celibate in honor of his dead wife. He thought, "You don't stand a chance," which made Purple Hair, sitting beside him, utterly speechless. How could such a complete moron possess such world-shaking power? After his childish games, No suddenly paused. He didn't need to attract just anyone. He wanted to find a woman who could care for his family and be a mother to his children. A real mother, not a widower like him. No turned to his subordinate, asking if he knew any decent women. Since he came from a rich family, he surely knew plenty of respectable people. He desperately wanted his children to know the warmth of a mother, but his subordinate suddenly screamed that he didn't know anyone at all. Seeing such a strong reaction, No didn't press the issue. Instead, he brought up his writing lessons. He only had 200 characters left to learn to complete his mission, but his subordinate was being difficult, refusing to teach him despite his promise. This sent No into a rage, and he could only scream at him to teach him. He had made a promise to his daughter. The reason they were squatting wasn't to relieve themselves, but to practice writing. The man couldn't even remember 3 simple characters. His subordinate had no choice but to help him out. How could a genius daughter be born from such a dim-witted father? No could only pray that Seo wouldn't test him on all 1,000 characters, or he'd lose all face. And while he was dreaming of his adorable children getting along peacefully, Seo was actually giving her brother a stern lecture. Back at the arena, Hun and the squinty-eyed kid were perfectly matched. Neither was willing to back down. They spun simultaneously, launching a powerful kick at each other. Then, as if their minds were connected, they followed up with another devastating blow. Seeing the boy's hand torn and battered, yet still refusing to surrender, you couldn't tell if he was tough or just as stubborn as an ox. Chunin was getting anxious, but the sect master said that taking hits in a fight is normal. That's how one gains the experience needed for the future. As a fist flew towards him, Hun slightly tilted his body to dodge it flawlessly. He then drove his knee upward, landing a painful blow that sent his opponent staggering backward. After that hit, the squinty-eyed kid had to pause to catch his breath and regulate his rhythm. Throughout it all, Hun stood and waited patiently, wanting a fair fight like a true man. Suddenly, the boy demonstrated a new technique. His arm moved with such speed it created a wave-like effect. This was a transformation used in the heat of battle. Of course, it wasn't that the squinty-eyed kid didn't know it. He just never had the chance to use it while desperately trying to keep up with Hun. They charged at each other, clashing once more. Both children were burning with an intense fighting spirit, giving their all to avoid defeat. But after just a few more blows, Hun suddenly noticed something strange about his opponent. He immediately changed his fist into an open palm, reaching out to catch the boy. His opponent's strength was gone. He had collapsed from exhaustion. The match ended amidst the cheers of the crowd, but the kind-hearted Hun was only worried about whether his rival was okay. But into this celebratory atmosphere, a harsh and arrogant voice cut through. He refused to acknowledge Hun's victory, looking down on the boy's humble origins. It was none other than the father of the brown-haired boy. Have you ever used a tree root to practice calligraphy? Only one person could do such a thing. The heavenly dragon, Jiangmunbi. The man next to him immediately began to flatter him. Every time I see your writing, sir, it's like I've reached enlightenment. Celine, cut the crap. If you have something to say, just spit it out. The man brought up the grand tournament, where the children of noble families were being utterly humiliated. But the heavenly dragon simply didn't care. He remained focused on his art. Everyone should mind their own business. Why was he getting bothered with this? Are you all 3-year-old children? And so, the man could only leave, in dejection. After waiting for hours just to listen to some nonsense, he got absolutely nothing in return. Back at the tournament, the brown-haired boy's father was still trying to justify their losses. Chunin immediately unleashed a verbal assault on him. By insulting Hun, he was also calling every child who lost, to the boy, a complete disgrace. Seeing the tension skyrocket, Lei Long stepped forward to resolve the situation, cooling the atmosphere by moving on to the next match. The next battle was about to begin, but Hun's stamina was reaching its limit after 2 intense fights, so Myung stepped onto the stage to take his place, leaving no room for complaints. The kid with the ponytail arrogantly declared that victory would be his. Before he went up, Chunin gave him a reminder, stressing the importance of distance, then tied a red headband on Myung, giving him a warrior's spirit as he ascended. Seeing Hun all bruised up but still fired up, Seo went into full mom mode, scolding him non-stop while gently blowing on his wounds to make the pain go away. Having a blockhead for an older brother was just something she had to deal with. It was a family trait. As the 2 fighters took their places, Myung recalled the warnings he'd been given. This guy was from the Hidden Dragon class, meaning he was no pushover. That class heavily emphasized weapon mastery, and Chunin had demonstrated to the kids how to wield a simple staff. Holding it at the end turns it into a long-range weapon. For close-quarters combat, you simply grip the middle. With just one stick, you could thrust, slash, and parry. The weapon isn't useless. The one who can't wield it is. So, if the ponytail kid was properly trained, he would surely be a tough opponent. But for Myung, as long as he could strike and counter, he could handle anything. He expertly blocked the stinging blows from his foe, watching him show off by spinning the staff. In that flashy display, the boy instantly spotted a blind spot, crouching low to minimize the target area. Just as Myung predicted, from a distance, he could clearly see every attack and dodge them with ease. Even as the assault became a relentless storm, the boy maintained his rhythm and evaded each strike. Myung possessed incredibly sharp eyes, a skill likely honed from years of observing his older brother. But in Chun-in's mind, no matter how clever the two boys were, neither could compare to Seo, for she was a genius among geniuses. The two fighters rushed at each other, but this time, Mi-young couldn't dodge, forced to block the blow with his arm. Everyone knew that despite his incredible fighting spirit, his body hadn't fully developed yet, and couldn't endure such punishment for long. As Chun-in was cheering for Mi-young, he was suddenly interrupted by a loud, booming voice. It was Juna, a teacher from the school. Flanked by two students, she was completely engrossed in the children's match. Seeing Mi-young choose to face the Flying Dragon's techniques head-on, she couldn't help but admire his warrior's heart. But when she saw Chun-in's smug face, she openly scoffed. If he were her student, he wouldn't need to engage in close combat and take unnecessary damage. The headmaster knew for sure that his little brother's chosen disciples wouldn't fall into anyone else's hands. However, the real concern was Earth Dragon 𝒂𝒓𝒕𝒊𝒂𝒍. He was No's master, and therefore had easy access to the children. A storm was brewing in the old man's heart. He was a fool for not recognizing such immense talent right before his very eyes. From within the cheering crowd, the twin masters also appeared to watch the match. But unlike everyone else, Ba-rang was cursing the boy. Lose! Just lose already! Surrender! Because if Mi-young won, he would catch the eye of powerful figures wanting to take him as a disciple, and then their own chances would be ruined. Hearing this, Yi-rong finally realized why the five dragons would suddenly appear at a children's martial arts tournament. Having Chun-in snatch disciples from them was annoying enough. But while they were still figuring things out, the crowd erupted. Mi-young had closed the distance between them. The opponent was exhausted, his staff swings growing sluggish. The boy seized the opening, grabbing the weapon and using his own strength to pull it close, delivering a devastating punch right to his face. But the ponytail kid refused to give up, gritting his teeth and trying to wrestle the staff back. It wasn't that easy. Mi-young swiftly swung his leg, kicking the staff and snapping it in two. He followed up with another powerful kick, just as the boy tried to turn and deliver a finishing blow. But the MC stepped in to stop the fight. Amidst the thunderous applause of the audience, everyone knew Mi-young was the victor. The boy had barely dragged his tired body off the stage when he was stopped by Seo. The moment she took off his glove, Mi-young's arm was revealed to be a mess of red and purple bruises. Then came the endless lecture. A song of sisterly love, nagging him about needing to deflect attacks instead of taking them head-on like an ox. In a corner, 4 kids who had been hanging out together were also watching and evaluating the fight. They were from the Dream Dragon sect. Meanwhile, at the Thunder Dragon's residence, the man Yoon-gang burst through the door. This was a familiar sight, as he wasn't the only one who had come asking about the children's father, because it wasn't just Yoon-gang who was there. Everyone was interested in these talented kids. Armed with this news, he desperately wanted to make them his disciples. But his rivals for the children were not just some ordinary martial artists. They needed a brilliant strategy to win over such talent. First, they had to find information about No, but Earth Dragon 𝒂𝒓𝒕𝒊𝒂𝒍 had hidden all traces of him. No matter how hard they tried, they found nothing. They not only had to watch out for Chun-in, but the Flying Dragon had also come sniffing around for information. But at any cost, he had to have those children for his own clan's future. Ever since he'd laid eyes on Hun and Mi-young, Yoon-gang's heart had been set ablaze, as if the sun of truth had pierced his soul. He saw a phoenix in them. Hearing this, the Thunder Dragon slammed his teacup down. He had never competed with anyone before. But this time, he refused to let such talent slip through his fingers. On one condition, Yoon-gang had to train diligently and stop messing around with women and causing trouble. At the same time, the Flying Dragon was looking at his old swords, an undeniable smile on his face. The women behind him knew their master, also coveted those children. The Flying Dragon intended to take all 3 of them, and he would personally train them to become extraordinary. But he wouldn't bring them back immediately. He knew their father was still on a mission. They weren't orphans you could just take as you pleased. The Flying Dragon shared the same fear as the others that someone would snatch them up first. And the most worrying competitor was Chun-in, the first to discover their talent. Suddenly, perhaps because he was getting on in years, the Flying Dragon felt a sense of unease. At his age, to be this anxious for a new disciple. Hearing this, his followers burst into an uproar, vowing to find a way to bring the 3 children to the Flying Dragon. While the entire martial world was searching for him, No was eating as if he hadn't seen food in several lifetimes. No matter how many times they witnessed this spectacle, his 2 companions could never get used to his pig-like eating habits. Seeing the 2 of them not touching their chopsticks, he warmly urged them to eat. He then glanced at the purple-haired kid. "You're 14 years old, but you're skinnier than a ghost. You might even be smaller than my daughter." His youngest offered the boy a whole boiled chicken, but this sudden kindness felt foreign. The purple-haired boy instinctively refused. But then, No began to speak. As a father, he couldn't just ignore a child in need. His words made the boy think of No's own children, wondering if they had enough to eat right now. While their own father was out here, feasting on delicacies, surely his parents must be worried sick too. At that thought, the boy's eyes welled with tears as he began to eat. He took his very first bite. The purple-haired young master finally understood, tearing off a chicken leg and slowly savoring it. Meanwhile, the vice chief of the Black Serpent Hall dispatched a messenger pigeon. Anxiety etched itself onto the commander's face. Would this mission truly succeed? They had already sent assassins to eliminate No, just as ordered. All he could do was pray his elites would return alive. Seeing his commander's distress, the vice chief made a proposal. He himself would join the battle. His participation would guarantee their victory. Though surprised by the decision, the commander could only sigh. He gave his consent, dispatching his most trusted subordinate. After so many trials and tribulations, their carriage finally returned to the Heavenly Dragon Association. The moment No's feet touched the ground, he greedily inhaled the familiar air. To his surprise, Captain Ham and the other leaders were there to greet them. A director with an oddly sharp chin wanted to take charge of the purple-haired boy, but the young master's gaze was fixed solely on No. Seizing the opportunity, No whispered to him, trying to score some points for protecting him on their long journey. But the purple-haired boy demanded No stay by his side. This, despite No's desperate pleas to see his children after so long. Taking the cue, the sharp-chinned director chimed in. He ordered No to serve the young master properly. Annoyed, but left with no choice, No had to obey. But when he looked up to say goodbye to his young disciple, the boy was nowhere to be found, vanished without a trace. They were then led to a luxurious chamber for the young master to rest. Before leaving, No was sternly reminded to cater to his new little master's every need. The rage boiled inside him. Was he some kind of nanny? But he had to remain calm. Once he got his reward, he was out of here for good. Gazing at a scroll on the wall, No felt a swell of pride. He could actually read a few of the characters. He had no idea of its profound meaning, of course. But according to his own interpretation, it depicted his life story. At age 20, he was wandering alone and isolated. Then, at 30, he realized nothing in this world is free, so he focused on the art of negotiation. But it was only when he had children that he received a divine revelation. His true purpose was to raise his precious kids into fine people. He was busy admiring his own profound, scholarly interpretation when the purple-haired boy burst out laughing. He laughed right in No's face. He couldn't believe someone could twist the scroll's meaning so completely, all through the unique logic of a peerless father. For No to grasp heaven's will at only 40 years old. It was truly a miracle. All this time, the boy had patiently endured No's endless stories about his kids, and he found this man. Absolutely fascinating. Someone who would throw himself into mortal danger, all for the sake of his beloved children. After a quick look around, No started whispering again. A little flattery couldn't hurt, right? Maybe it would increase his reward money. But the boy wasn't about to let No off that easily. He'd be paid for his service, of course, but he also had to pay for the fishing rod he broke. No erupted in fury. If he hadn't needed it to save him, why would he have spent money on that stupid thing? This man was just too interesting. The purple-haired boy made an offer. He wanted No to work for him, before No could even think of refusing. The boy named his price. A salary 10 times his current one. No's face went completely blank. He began to question his entire existence. 10 times? He had to ask again, just to be sure. It was unbelievable. At that very moment, the Heavenly Dragon Association was in a full assembly, the 5 dragons included. Everyone was buzzing about the secret mission the Earth Dragon, 𝒂𝒓𝒕𝒊𝒂𝒍, had undertaken. However, 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕𝒊𝒂𝒍 remained silent, needing to report to the leader first. He humbled himself and apologized, needing to appease the 5 dragons before the truth could be revealed. But no matter how secret the mission was, information had been leaked. There was definitely a traitor in their midst, a high-ranking official who had infiltrated the association. Sensing the rising tension, the sect leader stepped forward to mediate. He reminded them that up until now, 𝒂𝒂𝒓𝒕𝒊𝒂𝒍's plans had always brought great benefit to their society. There was no need to pressure him. His words silenced the dissenters, who agreed to wait for the leader's return. With no other issues, the meeting was about to conclude, when suddenly, the lightning dragon raised his hand with a request. Just as expected, he wanted to take the children and make them disciples of his own hall. The entire room was stunned into silence. Chun-In, consumed by rage, slammed his fist on the table. He knew it was disrespectful to an elder, but his anger was justified. He was the only one who had trained them. and now this old fox wanted to snatch them away. But the lightning dragon just smirked, pointing out a critical fact. They had not yet formed an official master-disciple bond. Therefore, he had every right to interfere. Chun-In was speechless. The old man was right. He was still waiting for permission. From no to officially accept the children. A fiery debate erupted, and all the others could do was listen to the two elders argue, until Chun-In was backed into a corner. He was forced to admit he hadn't been acknowledged yet, because he lacked the father's consent. The sect leader flinched, but it was too late to silence his foolish junior brother. The lightning dragon seized the opening. Without the parents' permission, the children were not officially Chun-In's disciples, which meant other candidates were free to recruit them. This legendary talent was now fair game. Chun-In argued back desperately, reminding everyone that he was the one who helped them through their hardest times, and had been training them all along. But the cunning old fox simply twisted his words. He claimed to be so moved by Chun-In's compassion that he, too, wished to help. He wanted to bring the children to the Lightning Dragon Hall, to care for them and nurture their incredible talent. The Flying Dragon, who also aided abandoned children, saw an opportunity. He used the same logic and declared his interest as well. Instead of fighting Chun-In directly, the Flying Dragon simply sided with the cunning Lightning Dragon. This left Chun-In completely powerless. He collapsed into his seat, utterly defeated. Seeing that the situation had reached a stalemate, the sect leader knew he had to act. If he let Chun-In continue his pointless argument, they would risk losing this immense talent altogether. He made a final decision. The choice of who would be their master would be left to their father, No. Back in the room, No decided to test the boy, wondering if he would go back on his word. No lied, claiming his current salary was quite high. But the purple-haired boy didn't even care how much he made. He simply repeated he would pay 10 times that amount. At those words, No's eyes began to glow with a brilliant light. They tried to recruit the main character, but he explained he doesn't take on dangerous missions. For the past 8 years, he's just been a simple gatekeeper. Hearing this, the purple-haired girl decided to offer him a similar position. The offer to become her personal gatekeeper made No ecstatic, as if he'd just escaped from a prison camp. He grabbed her hand, amazed that someone so genuinely kind could even exist. Just as the decisive moment arrived for No to accept the job offer, the Earth Dragon, 𝒂𝒓𝒕𝒊𝒂𝒍, appeared out of nowhere, refusing to let the purple-haired man poach his prized talent. Hearing No speak so casually with a high-ranking official, his colleague was utterly baffled. It was only then that he realized the old man who had always been helping him was none other than the legendary Earth Dragon himself. Just as No tried to slip away, the old man called out, inviting him for a drink, adding that the purple-haired man was welcome to join. No broke out in a cold sweat. How could he possibly accept a job offer right in front of his current boss? This guy clearly wanted him to lose his next paycheck. As he rushed home to his children, memories flooded his mind. Images of Hun and Myung crying their eyes out, feeling neglected compared to their sister, So. The poor kids felt that they only ever got 1 kiss, while their sister received 10. They tearfully wondered if they were even his real children, and both began to wail. The memory made No's eyes water. He had hugged them both tightly, explaining that he was a little biased towards Seo because one day she would have to get married and live somewhere else. She wouldn't be with him for the rest of her life like his 2 sons. Hearing this, Seo immediately declared she would never marry and would stay with her father forever. The whole family then shared a heartfelt hug. Lost in that touching memory, he spotted a butcher's stall. Soon, he was loaded down with meat from head to toe, ready for his children to leap into his arms. That day, the children feasted until they were completely full. During dinner, they excitedly recounted the day's events to their father. Hearing how his 2 boys had won a spectacular victory, No felt incredibly proud of them. That night, for the first time in a long 6 months, all 4 of them slept together. He couldn't believe such earth-shattering events had happened while he was gone. Although he was acting as their advisor, No felt a deep sense of unease. This situation was far from simple, and he worried that they would now be under constant surveillance. The only reason he'd let his kids learn martial arts was for them to build strong, healthy bodies, nothing more, nothing less. And just like that, No was suddenly surrounded. A crowd of people had gathered, each one begging him to let them take his children as their disciples. They all used their own elaborate arguments, promising to turn the kids into legendary martial artists. This display of greed thoroughly annoyed Chun-In. The Sky Dragon was the epitome of avarice. He already had a mountain of disciples, yet still craved more talent. He argued that since he didn't have a single disciple yet, he could give the children his full, undivided attention. Seeing them arguing with the fury of roaring dragons, No realized this situation was far more serious than what Seo had described. The masters were all vying for his attention, but the moment he spoke, A sudden silence fell as all eyes turned to him. After confirming that they all wished to take his children as disciples and teach them martial arts, he delivered the expected response, a flat-out rejection that sent them into an uproar. No explained that he only sent his kids to martial arts school because they wanted to go. However, he had no desire for them to grow up in a world where fighting was necessary for survival. Then, he turned and walked away, his silhouette the very picture of cool confidence. For today, No would pretend he heard nothing, leaving the dumbfounded masters in his wake. All three had been rejected. No grumbled under his breath, wondering why these old geezers were so eager to drag his precious children into a world of bloodshed. But still, he couldn't help but smile like a fool. His kids were so exceptional that the greatest masters were fighting over them. But when he got home, he found Hun and Myung looking utterly dejected. When he asked what was wrong, the kids wouldn't say a word, feeling it was too childish to complain about. Thankfully, the nanny was there to fill him in on what had happened. The wealthy patriarch of the Yuan family had just returned, bringing back a trove of fascinating new toys. His kid had invited everyone to play, except for No's two children. That's why they looked so miserable. No knew those moving toys were incredibly expensive. Nevertheless, he woke his two boys up and announced he was taking them toy shopping, because now their father had plenty of money. Hearing this, their faces lit up, and they immediately clung to their dad, leaving the other two speechless. Like father, like sons, indeed. At the market, No split from the kids, asking the nanny to buy groceries for the day. He then took his children to the toy stall. "Pick whatever you want," he said. Seeing the brilliant sparkle in their eyes, No felt a pang of guilt. Perhaps he had been too frugal in the past. That's why his children were deprived of so many things. Despite their excitement, the two boys only picked out small, cheap-looking toys. As much as they wanted the bigger toys, they didn't want their father to spend too much money on them. Seeing his children being so considerate, he turned to the shopkeeper and said, "I'll take everything." The two boys tried to stop him, but No wanted to show off for anyone who had ever looked down on his kids. He finalized the deal, walking away with a massive sack of toys. Back at his security guard post, No was still being relentlessly hounded by the masters. He tried to be firm, threatening to report them to his superiors if they continued to bother him. He had no idea they were times the top brass. Just as the tension reached its peak, the Earth Dragon appeared to save the day, reminding everyone of their prior agreement to respect the father's decision. He then proceeded to give the masters a stern lecture, telling them to stop bothering a man during his working hours. Thanks to the Earth Dragon's intervention, they finally agreed to leave, but they remained defiant, vowing to return again soon. Once the pests were gone, No felt immensely grateful, but he couldn't resist taking a jab at the Earth Dragon's hidden status. 𝒂𝒓𝒕𝒊𝒂𝒍 could only admire the man's nerve. Even after working here for 7 or 8 years, No was still completely oblivious to his true identity. No then spoke from the heart. As a father, he didn't want his children walking a path of endless fighting, but now, he was worried he might get fired for his defiance. Forbidding his kids from learning under these powerful figures was a huge risk. Of course, he had nothing to worry about. There was no way the Earth Dragon would let such an incredible talent slip through his fingers. 𝒂𝒓𝒕𝒊𝒂𝒍 also gently reminded him of the purple-haired man's very tempting offer. Naturally, No had been swayed by the mountain of money, but he wasn't an ungrateful person. During his hardest times, he had received so much help, a place to live, and even a nanny for his kids. He could never betray that kindness by leaving for another job. However, he did have one request for 𝒂𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒍. There were high-level schools within the alliance, and he hoped to secure a spot for his children there. Just then, a group of arrogant kids approached and introduced themselves, assuming their reputations preceded them. But, without any intention of being rude, Hun innocently asked, "Who are you guys?" This sent the bald-headed kid into a rage. His great-grandfather was the Sky Dragon himself. But of course, there was no way. No's kids would know that. Seeing that his reputation wasn't working, he changed tactics. He invited the 3 siblings to join his group, the manhwarecommendation. It was an organization formed for the top students who would one day become masters in the alliance. They began to boast about how amazing they were, certain that everyone would be desperate to join them. He was about to agree, but before he could finish, a voice cut him off. "Absolutely not," Seo declared. "We have too much to do at home for you to be playing these childish games." The bald man instantly saw her as an obstacle. He scoffed, claiming he didn't need a girl anyway. He was only here to recruit Hun and Myung. However, after the 2 brothers had a quick chat, they actually started to feel sorry for the recruiters. They wanted to join in the fun, but explained that the nanny's son was bullying the neighborhood kids. Dealing with that family matter was their top priority, so they had no time to play. And with that, they left. As they walked away, casually discussing dinner, They left the recruiters seething with a massive ball of frustration. At the same time, Fei Long's disciples were devising a new plan to persuade the long-haired no. Their new strategy was simple. If you can't convince the father, go directly for the children. That very evening, the day of reckoning arrived for the family of three. The tension was almost unbearable. He was on the verge of a breakdown over writing. When No couldn't remember the next character, he tried to deflect by turning to scold little Myung. Then, he slyly peeked over at Hoon's paper, pretending to offer advice. Of course, this pathetic attempt to cheat was immediately seen through by So. Her sharp personality made her father question her entire lineage. Who does she even take after? He wondered. Her mother is nothing like this. But after being thoroughly scolded by his own daughter, No, the patriarch, could only swallow his tears and try his best. He painstakingly wrote out each and every character, and that's where we'll end this chapter. We hope you'll support us with a like and share, so we have the motivation to bring you more incredible stories.